Chapter 3348. How is it? Is it serious? Mu Yichen shook his head and comforted him. It's okay. It's just a small injury. You was still nervous. Xiao Yichen said helplessly. I've suffered worse injuries before. It's okay. Don't worry, okay? Okay. Yu nodded, but he looked guilty. Xiao Yichen wiped his hands on his trousers until the blood on his hands was clean. He then reached out and patted his head gently. Then he stood up, walked over to Dietrich, and took off his tie. Yu watched from the side. He tied Dietrich's hands behind his back, hooked his legs up, and tied his hands and feet behind his back with the tie. His tying technique was different from usual. It was the professional tying technique used by the police. He was tied up tightly and couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. He took out a pair of handcuffs. His movements were a little too big and affected his wound, but he didn't make a sound. He handcuffed Dietrich to a pillar at the side. After making sure that everything was fine, he turned to Yu and said, "Let's go find Mommy." "Okay." Yu nodded and asked worriedly, "Where's Mommy?" "In the cockpit. We have to hurry over to prevent any accidents." "Did you send a signal to Daddy?" Yu suddenly asked anxiously. Xiao Yichen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Yu, do you think I'm stupid? When I rescued Mommy, I sent a location to Daddy's terminal. It's been more than half an hour. Daddy and Uncle should be here soon." Yu was completely relieved. The two little lads held hands and walked to the cockpit. Yun Shusher stayed in the cockpit. She stared at the captain with a burning gaze, but he looked exhausted. He forced himself to steer the ship, but blood kept flowing out of his wound. Yun Shusher couldn't help but worry if he had lost too much blood. "Are you all right?" Yun Shusher squinted her eyes and asked. While she was worried, she also suspected that he was playing some tricks again. Could it be that he was luring her to let her guard down and wanted to do something again? The captain's lips twitched violently. He suddenly staggered and fell onto the rudder. Yun Shusher was startled. She went forward vigilantly and pushed his shoulder. However, his body tilted and he fell into his seat. There was no movement. "He's dead." Yun Shusher was frightened. She immediately reached out to hold the rudder, but she didn't know how to balance it. She didn't know how to control such a large cruise ship, so she immediately reached out to slap his face. "Wake up!" When she touched his face just now, it was ice cold. He seemed to have lost too much blood and fainted from shock. Once a person lost too much blood and did not stop the bleeding for a long time, they would go into shock due to excessive blood loss, leading to brain death. Were humans so fragile? She sighed in her heart. Yun Shusher was in disbelief. She held onto the rudder and looked at the dashboard nervously. However, she saw many lights blinking. She gritted her teeth and tried hard to recognize the signs. However, she couldn't understand some of the signs at all. She didn't know what they were for, so she didn't dare to touch them. Looking ahead, she couldn't tell if there was any danger in the seemingly calm sea. She also couldn't understand the radar map on the screen. Chapter 3349. Yun Shusher was flustered, but she could only stabilize the rudder. She did not dare to act rashly. Beside her, the captain fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Generally speaking, a captain was not enough to control a cruise ship. In the cockpit, the cruise ship was not operated by the captain. Most of the time, it was the sailors who steered the ship. Just now, there was a slight malfunction in the cockpit. The lookout had noticed something unusual ahead, so the captain, first mate, and third mate came over to inspect and command. Xiao Yichen knew a little about maritime affairs. When he saw the captain in the cockpit, he knew that something special must have happened. Hence, the captain personally came to steer the ship. Therefore, he was spared to stay alive and control the cruise ship. The captain was fearless because he knew how important he was. Therefore, he was certain that Yun Shirshir would not dare to attack him. Yun Shirshir did not want to attack him at first, but she knew that if she did not do anything, she might be the one to die. However, the current crisis was that without a sailor at the helm, there were often many uncertainties. Under normal circumstances, without anyone steering the ship, the cruise ship would drift on its own without any accidents. However, this was under normal circumstances. However, the cruise ship had a fixed route at sea. Only by following the fixed route could they avoid many dangers. The sea was huge, so huge that it was unimaginable. 70% of the world was made up of the sea, and people's control of the sea was still very limited. There were many dangers at sea that were hard to predict. If they deviated from the route, it was a small matter. If they could not avoid the storm, the ship could capsize at any time. Now, she was the only one in the cockpit. Yun Shirshir was overcautious. Just now, she had seen how the captain steered the ship. The controls were complicated, and there were many things on the dashboard. She could not tell what was what. The layout of the cruise ship was different from that of a car. She could not understand it just by looking at it. At this moment, an alarm suddenly sounded from the screen. The red light kept flashing. Yun Shirshir walked over and looked at the screen. However, she saw a bunch of random codes on the screen. She was confused. She thought it was English, but after looking at it for a long time, she couldn't understand what the series of numbers on the screen meant. On the screen, there was only a vague route. After the red light flashed for a long time, Yun Shirshir didn't dare to touch it. Not long after, a red-framed exclamation mark jumped up in the upper right corner. What happened? Yun Shirshir was so anxious that she broke out in cold sweat. The alarm in the cockpit attracted the attention of the second mate, who was in another cabin. He saw that the door was locked and became suspicious. He approached the door and looked inside. He was shocked. Inside the cockpit, several corpses were strewn all over the floor. Blood was everywhere. Yun Shirshir heard the commotion at the door and turned to look at it. She saw a sailor-like man blocking the door. Startled, she took a step back and subconsciously tightened her grip on the pistol in her hand. Her eyes remained vigilant as she stared at the door from start to finish. "Open the door." The man outside the door shouted for the door to be opened. Yun Shirshir was not stupid enough to open the door for her. "There's an anomaly ahead that has triggered the alarm. Let me in." Chapter 3350. She raised her gun and aimed it at him. When the sailor outside the door saw that she had a gun, he raised his hand instinctively and explained, I just came to check on the situation. I hope you know that if the ship is in danger, we will all die." "I know." Yun Shirshir gulped nervously. "I'll let you in, but don't threaten me. Otherwise, I'll definitely kill you." The sailor nodded in fear. Yun Shirshir aimed her gun at him as she reached out to open the door. However, she realized that the door was locked from the outside. When the second mate saw that the door was locked from the outside, he immediately reacted. He took out a bunch of keys from his pocket, found the key, and inserted it into the lock. From the beginning to the end, Yun Shirshir aimed her gun at him vigilantly. The moment the door opened, the sailor pounced on her. Yun Shirshir was caught off guard and fell to the ground. Just as she was about to shoot, the man punched the corner of her mouth. Bam! She was caught off guard. She arched her body in pain, but she hugged the gun tightly to prevent him from snatching it away. The sailor pulled out his knife from his waist and held the handle. Just as he raised his hand, suddenly the ship let out an ear-piercing creak, and there was a strong turbulence. It was as if the entire ship was quaking and the mountains were shaking. Yun Shirshir was shocked. She only felt that the entire ship was still shaking, as if the world was turning upside down. What's going on? Yun Shirshir's heart sank into great fear. The huge shaking caused the tip of the knife that the man was about to stab her chest to deviate and pierce the deck beside her. The tip of the knife stabbed into the deck ruthlessly. Coupled with the unstable center of gravity, it was difficult to pull it out. Yun Shirshir reacted and took this opportunity to kick him away, just as she held the gun tightly. But before she could aim, there was an even louder shaking. Boom! Through the deck, she seemed to hear an ear-piercing, tearing sound coming from the bottom of the ship. Her heart turned cold. The sailor couldn't care less about her. He quickly got up and rushed to the screen, shouting that something was wrong. Shit! He cursed and threw himself into the rescue. Yun Shirshir did not know what was going on. Just as she was confused, she heard an ear-piercing sound. The hull shook again. This time, the shaking was not as fierce as the previous 2 times. In an instant, the entire cockpit was plunged into darkness. The electrical system was damaged, and the entire cabin was plunged into darkness. Xiao Yichen and you were on their way here when they encountered such a strong turbulence. The cabin shook continuously, and you almost lost his balance. Xiao Yichen immediately reached out to support him. What's going on? You looked around nervously. Under the dreary moonlight, the waves crashed against the hull of the boat. Xiao Yichen walked to the railing and looked down. When he saw that the waves were abnormal, he frowned and said in shock, "I'm afraid we've hit a reef." Hit a reef? Yes. Is it serious? You didn't understand these things, and asked him curiously. He suddenly realized that he didn't know everything. He also realized that sometimes he needed to rely on Xiao Yichen. Xiao Yichen nodded solemnly and said worriedly, "From the looks of it, it must be very serious." A ship accidentally hitting a reef could be a serious matter. Chapter 3351. There were 2 types of rocks, soft rocks and hard rocks. When the former hit rocks, the seabed would be soft clay. When the latter hit rocks, they would hit sharp rocks with sharp edges. These rocks were usually as sharp as knives. When the ship hit the rocks, it would be like a knife cutting through the ship's hull. The waves were so rough, which meant that the rocks were very big. The ship was traveling at high speed, so it was very risky for it to hit rocks at such a fast speed. When Xiao Yichen saw that the ship had stopped, he knew that the bottom of the ship must have been cut. Once the ship's hull was cut open, the bottom of the ship would be torn apart by the rocks, and water would enter the ship. If water entered the hull, it would cause the ship to capsize and sink to a certain extent. Xiao Yichen looked at you anxiously. "I'm not sure how serious the situation is, but I'm sure that the ship hit rocks and the water entering the hull affected the electrical system. This means that the bottom of the ship has been cut open. We have to find Mommy as soon as possible, and then find a lifeboat to take Mommy away from this ship." "You mean this cruise ship could sink at any time?" "Not at any time. It can't sink immediately, but," Xiao Yichen said each word seriously and affectionately, "we don't have much time left." You also became nervous." She nodded and ran toward the cockpit. Along the way, the ship kept shaking. The originally brightly lit banquet hall suddenly fell into darkness. The band members also stood up curiously. The music stopped abruptly, and the sudden silence made everyone even more nervous. The unexpected circuit failure caused everyone to fall into a panic. "Help! Oh my God, what's going on? Did something happen?" In the banquet hall, the guests were screaming nervously, and the scene was in a mess. The screams were hoarse, and there was a hubbub of voices. Accompanied by the sound of tableware falling and shattering, many people scrambled to run towards the door. At the most desperate moment, the selfishness of human nature was exposed. Many people rushed forward, but because it was dark, They couldn't see anything clearly. The banquet hall was completely enclosed, so there was no light, and they couldn't see their own fingers. People followed their instincts and ran to the door like a flock of frightened, headless flies. In the crowd, some women accidentally tripped over the things under their feet and fell to the ground. They wondered if it was because of the shaking of the ship that they lost their balance and fell, but no one was willing to help them. Instead, they stepped over them and ran to the door. At this critical juncture, their lives were on the line. If they could not even care about their own safety, who would care about the lives of others? Many weak women were trampled to death just like that. People broke through the banquet hall's door and rushed to the deck. The crowd surged onto the deck like a rising tide. Xiao Yichen and Yu happened to pass by the banquet hall. When they saw people running towards the deck, they immediately hugged Yu. "Be careful." Yu was pulled into his arms. Then they saw the black mass of people running out of the banquet hall. At this moment, the ship shook again and started to tilt slightly. The people who were running towards the deck suddenly lost their center of gravity and stumbled in the direction of the tilt. There was nothing to hold on to. Chapter 3352. Some of them were lucky. Even though they were nervous, they managed to grab onto the railing in time. Some of them panicked and didn't know how to react. They crashed into the railing and fell into the sea. Ah! Screams erupted from the crowd. Seeing people fall into the sea, they became even more nervous. Xiao Yichen held onto Yu's hand tightly and groped in a direction with fewer people. Yu was very calm, and so was Xiao Yichen. They knew very well that the most important thing was to stay calm. If they panicked, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The two little lads held hands tightly and weaved through the crowd. It was only when they left the area of the banquet hall that there were fewer and fewer people. Quite a number of sailors walked toward the cockpit. As they got closer to it, Yun Shirshir's voice was suddenly heard from a corner. Yu, Xiao Yichen. Yu was the first to hear it. Xiao Yichen heard it as well. Both of them stopped in their tracks and looked towards the source of the voice. They saw Yun Shirshir running towards them. She hugged them anxiously and looked them up and down. She saw that Yu and Xiao Yichen had different degrees of injuries on their bodies. Yu's face had some bruises. When she saw the bloodstains on Xiao Yichen's abdomen, she held her breath. "Xiao Yichen, you're injured." Xiao Yichen comforted her. "Mommy, don't worry. The blood isn't mine." He lied to her on purpose to comfort her. He didn't want her to worry, especially at a time like this. Yu said strangely, "Mommy, why are you here?" Xiao Yichen said, "That you were in the cockpit." Xiao Yichen suddenly realized something and asked suspiciously, "Is the captain dead?" Yun Shirshir nodded guiltily. "I stabbed him. I don't know if it's because I injured his arteries, but he lost a lot of blood and fainted. He's no longer showing any signs of life. I shouldn't have hit him so hard. Is he trying to kill you?" Xiao Yichen's eyes flashed dangerously. "Yes, if that's the case, Mommy, you don't have to blame yourself. He deserved to die." After pausing for a moment, Xiao Yichen continued, "I suspect that the ship has hit a reef and there's a big hole in the bottom of the ship. Most likely, water has entered the ship and caused it to tilt. I'm worried that the boat will capsize soon." "Capsize!" She sucked in a breath of cold air. "What should we do?" Xiao Yichen said. "Let's find a lifeboat and leave this place. Mommy, don't be afraid. There's still time. We can make it." "Where is the lifeboat?" "Under normal circumstances, it should be on the left and right sides of the Xian. I haven't seen it on my way here. I'll go to the stern to take a look immediately." "All right." Yun Shirshir nodded. Yu suddenly grabbed Xiao Yichen. The latter turned around with a puzzled expression and asked, "What's wrong?" Dietress's VIP cabin is in the middle. Yes, then will he place the lifeboat at the stern, which is far away from the middle? You narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Xiao Yichen heard this and seemed to have woken up from a dream. The lifeboat should be near the VIP cabin. Xiao Yichen grabbed Yun Shirshir and Yu Yu's hands and said, "Let's go back." The three of them walked through the chaotic crowd. When they arrived near the VIP cabin, they saw Dietress walking toward the right side of the ship, surrounded by his subordinates. Chapter 3353. After they left, a few of his subordinates rushed over and untied him, as if he knew that the cruise ship had hit the rocks and was about to go silent. Dietrich hysterically ordered his subordinates to release the lifeboats. Yu had hit his head with a vase, so even though he had regained consciousness, he looked groggy and not very clear-headed. Hearing footsteps on the deck, Dietrich turned his head and saw Xiao Yichen and Yu. He was so frightened that he staggered and fell to the ground. When he saw Xiao Yichen, he seemed to be especially frightened. He kept retreating and pointed at Xiao Yichen with a trembling finger. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Kill them! Don't leave them alive! Kill them!" Yu was stunned. She knew that Dietrich had gone completely crazy. He probably knew that Xiao Yichen's abilities were extraordinary, so he wanted to kill them at all costs. However, Xiao Yichen was injured. His abdomen had been stabbed by Dietrich's hidden weapon. If he was unharmed, it would not be a problem for him to deal with these defeated soldiers. However, now that Xiao Yichen was injured, it would be dangerous if they focused on Xiao Yichen. Xiao Yichen was not afraid at all. He stepped forward and protected Yu and Yun Shirshir behind him. He said coldly, "If you dare to take a step forward, I swear that I will kill you." Even if he had to risk his life, he swore to protect Mommy. And Yu, Dietrich's subordinates, were about to charge forward with their daggers drawn. But when they heard this, they hesitated. They did not have guns on them, but even if they did, they might not dare to charge forward recklessly. If they had guns, they would still have some confidence. However, if they were unarmed, they would not have any chance of winning if they fought barehanded. Some of these people had experienced Xiao Yichen's terrifying skills before. It was hard to imagine that such a small body of a child actually contained such powerful energy. Even though the one standing in front of them was only an 8-year-old child, his gaze was piercingly cold, and his entire body seemed to be bathed in blood. His small body seemed to emit an extremely powerful aura, overbearing and domineering. Such a terrifying and powerful aura was something that not even an adult warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles could possess. This kind of aura was definitely not because of his extraordinary skills, but because of his strong desire to protect. In his heart, there was someone he wanted to protect. Therefore, even if he seemed weak at times, he would emit a terrifying energy at any moment. "What are you waiting for?" Dietrich kicked him. "What are you waiting for? Charge. Are you afraid of a child?" "I stabbed him in the abdomen." After a pause, Dietrich gritted his teeth and said, "Focus on where he's injured and attack his vitals." His subordinates looked at each other before hesitantly pouncing on Mu Yichen. Xiao Yichen pushed Yu away and said to him, "Protect Mommy." Yu nodded and held Yun Shirshir's hand as they dodged to the side. Yun Shirshir was worried about Xiao Yichen. She was worried that he would be attacked by so many people and get injured. Yu suddenly pulled her back and said to her, "Mommy, don't charge forward. Otherwise, you'll cause trouble. Then we can't just watch." Chapter 3354. I have an idea. Yu paused for a moment before continuing. "But, Mommy, you have to promise me that you'll stay here and not move." "What are you going to do?" "There's no time to explain. You'll know soon enough." Yu turned and left after he finished speaking. Yun Shirshir stood guard for a long time, trembling in fear. A few of Dietrich's subordinates rushed forward and surrounded Xiao Yichen. According to Dietrich's instructions, the few of them aimed at Xiao Yichen's injured area and attacked. Yun Shishir watched on in fear. Xiao Yichen knew how despicable these people were, so he took extra precautions. Yun Shishir originally wanted to rush forward, but when she thought of Yu Yu's words, she didn't dare to act recklessly. She was afraid that she wouldn't be of any help and would become a burden to Xiao Yichen and cause him more trouble. Knives and spears didn't hurt one's eyes, so she didn't dare to act recklessly. Yun Shishir hid in a corner. From the corner of her eye, she suddenly saw Dietrich walking to the back of the boat with his walking stick and activating something. It seemed like he wanted to raise and lower the lifeboat. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he was worried that Dietrich would take advantage of the chaos to escape on the lifeboat. He broke the wrist of one of his subordinates with a kick and threw a machete in front of Yun Shishir. "Mommy, don't let him escape." "Okay." Yun Shishir nodded heavily and rushed over to grab the machete tightly in her hand. She held the machete tightly and avoided the center of the fight. She ran behind Dietrich and viciously slashed the machete at him. Dietrich's reaction was still considered agile. When he heard the movement behind him, he quickly turned around and dodged her attack in time. However, because he dodged too pathetically, he fell to the ground, and the half-lowered lifeboat was suspended. Yun Shishir gripped the hilt of her sword nervously. Before she could attack again, Dietrich kicked her knee. She heard a crack, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated joint. She groaned in pain and fell to one knee, caught off guard. Seeing Dimitri's lunging at her to dodge the knife in her hand, she subconsciously raised her hand and threw the knife into the sea. Rather than let him snatch it, he might as well throw it away. She was not good at using a knife. Therefore, if she kept it in her hand, she might accidentally hurt herself. However, what Dietrich did not know was that Yun Shishir was filming Extreme Youth, and there were a few fighting scenes that the crew had specially hired professional instructors to train her. Just as he was about to pounce on her like a wolf, she nimbly dodged and reached out to grab his arm. Following the inertia, she bent his arm backward. Only a crack sound could be heard. It was the clear sound of bones breaking. Dietrich's voice was already hoarse from screaming. Due to the excruciating pain of the dislocated bone, he was drenched in cold sweat, but he could not make a sound. His eyes were ferocious as he looked back. Yun Shishir's fist was aimed at his eyes. She was wearing a ring on her finger. This was a priceless jewel that was prepared for her to be auctioned off. The 1-carat diamond ring, which was extremely hard, pierced his eyes. Dietrich was in so much pain that his whole body convulsed. He broke free from her and covered his eyes as he rolled around on the ground. She struggled to stand up and nimbly tore off a large section of her skirt. Taking advantage of the fact that he could not retaliate, she tied his hands tightly behind his back. Chapter 33:55. When Yun Shishir stood up and turned her head, she saw that Xiao Yichen was gradually losing his strength. The exhaustion on his face showed that he had overexerted himself. "Yichen!" In her anxiety, she was about to rush over when she suddenly heard rumbling footsteps from across the deck. It sounded as if a large group of people were running toward them. Everyone nervously stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of the sound. They saw Yu Yu running to the front with a large group of people behind him. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Mommy, release the lifeboat! Quick!" When Xiao Yichen heard this, he quickly rushed over to save the lifeboat. Yun Shishir finally understood what Yu Yu was doing. He must have been worried that Xiao Yichen would not be able to outlast these people. Hence, he ran to the banquet hall and told the bewildered guests that they could leave on the lifeboat. These people were eager to win, so they followed Yu Yu. The The rumbling of the crowd caused the entire deck to shake. The more chaotic the situation was, the more chaotic it was. In addition, no one stood out to give orders. Everyone was selfishly trying to survive and hoped that they would be safe. Hence, they did not care that their private actions would cause more and more chaos. Yun Shirshir was also desperately looking for a mechanism. However, no matter how fast she was, she could not stop these crazy people. They quickly rushed over. In an instant, the sea of people was like a violent wave that destroyed Yu and Xiao Chen. Yun Shirshir gritted her teeth and rushed into the crowd. When she saw Xiao Chen being pushed to the ground, she was worried that he would be injured. Without thinking, she pounced on him and used her body to shield him from the crowd. When Yu saw Yun Shirshir protecting Xiao Chen, he pounced on her with heartache. He hugged Yun Shirshir's back tightly and shielded her. Even though the crowd was surging, he did not let go. Creak, due to the excessive number of people surging towards the bow of the ship, most of the weight was placed on the bow of the ship. In an instant, the cruise ship tilted too much in a certain direction, causing the middle of the ship to show signs of cracking. Along with the tilt, many people were caught off guard and fell into the sea. Some of their heads fiercely hit the poles and fell into the sea, creating a pool of blood. Yun Shirshir hugged Mu Yichen tightly while Yu hugged her. The three of them curled up in a corner and relied solely on Yun Shirshir's strength. She held onto the railing tightly and barely stabilized her center of gravity. At this moment, the sound of propellers suddenly came from the sky. Da-da-da. The dark night sky was suddenly illuminated by the light from the helicopter. In an instant, it was as bright as day. Everyone looked up at the sky. The cabin door of the helicopter opened, and a ladder was thrown down from the cabin door. Several fully armed mercenaries jumped along the ladder and landed steadily on the deck, raising their submachine guns. Sparks flashed at the muzzle of the gun. In the blink of an eye, they killed their way out. Yun Shirshir did not know where these mercenaries came from. Seeing that they killed people without hesitation, she thought that they were Deitrus's subordinates. She immediately hugged Xiao Yichen tightly in her arms, fear in her eyes. When Yu saw the logo on their uniforms, a calm smile suddenly appeared on his face. He suddenly stood up and was about to walk towards them. Yun Shirshir pulled him back, nervously. You, what are you doing? Mommy, don't be afraid. Yu smiled and comforted her gently. It's okay. They are all my subordinates. What? Chapter 3356. Yun Shirshir was stunned. She looked at the row of valiant soldiers behind Yu, and her mind went blank. Subordinates. Yu turned around to face them. The smile on his face faded as he said coldly, "Why are you only here now?" The three soldiers immediately knelt on one knee. Their tall and strong bodies were much taller than Yu. However, such strong mercenaries were actually kneeling in front of a child. The leader said in a low voice, "Sorry, sir, we were a step too late." Their appearance greatly controlled the order of the scene. When the crowd saw them, they did not dare to act recklessly. They quickly retreated, afraid that they would infuriate them and become cold corpses like the people they had killed. The helicopter slowly descended. The crowd moved aside, and the huge helicopter landed steadily on the deck. The propellers slowly stopped. Mu Yaja suddenly appeared at the cabin door. He jumped down, and his gaze fell on her. When he saw her hand, he frowned and quickly walked over. When Yun Shirshir saw him, she suppressed all her grievances and forced a smile. He walked in front of her and half knelt on the ground. He held her shoulders tightly and looked at her from head to toe. She was worried that he would mistakenly think that she was seriously injured, so she quickly clarified, "This is not my blood." Mu Yasha clearly did not believe her, Only after he did a cursory check and confirmed that the blood was not hers did he relax slightly. In Yun Shirshir's arms, Xiao Yichen's body was slightly curled up due to his vigorous movements. The wound on his abdomen opened up again, and blood stained her body. Xiao Yichen was obviously seriously injured. Hence, his eyelids were heavy. When he vaguely heard Mu Yaja's voice, he was relieved. However, he soon fainted. Yu quickly said, "Daddy, we can't stay here for long. The cruise ship has hit a reef, and the hull is damaged. It will sink soon." Mu Yaja frowned. Yu continued, "Xiao Yichen's abdomen is injured. Daddy, he has lost a lot of blood and needs immediate surgery." Understood. Mu Yaja took Xiao Yichen from Yun Shirshir's arms. He stood up and walked towards the cabin door. When he turned around, he saw that Yu did not follow him. Mu Yaja turned around and said in confusion, "Yu, get on the helicopter as soon as possible." "Daddy, how many mercenaries did you bring?" "3. This helicopter can carry 5 people. Pilot, you, Xiao Yichen, and Mommy. Mommy, I will send a mercenary to protect you. Let the mercenaries stay." Mu Yaja said, "You get on the helicopter." "No." Yu glanced at Dietrich, who was unconscious on the deck. His gaze turned cold. "I don't care about the others, but I have to take this old man with me. I still have a score to settle with him." He was worried. Dietrich was cunning, and he had to keep an eye on him. The crew was evacuated separately to ensure their safety. Mu Yaja naturally did not agree. How could he leave him alone? No. Chapter 3357. Mu Yaja finally agreed. Yu smiled, walked forward, and stuffed a purple crystal into Xiao Yichen's clenched fist. In the rush of the crowd, many of the purple crystals had been squeezed out and rolled around. However, he held them tightly. There were still 2 left. These were gifts from Xiao Yichen. Now, he gave them to him as a possession talisman. Yu was really worried about Xiao Yichen. Therefore, he hoped that Mu Yaja would take Xiao Yichen away as soon as possible for treatment. Yun Shirshir said, Yu, I'll stay with you. Mommy, be good and listen to me. I'll be fine. You'll only make things worse if you stay. After all, it's more troublesome to protect 2 people than 1. As he spoke, he took a few steps back and waved his hand. Mu Yaja hugged Yun Shirshir's shoulders and brought her onto the helicopter. When the people on the deck saw this, they mustered their courage and walked toward the helicopter with hope of survival. A few mercenaries stepped forward and stood in front of Yu to protect him. They raised their submachine guns and fired at the deck. Everyone retreated a few steps in fright and could only watch helplessly as the helicopter slowly ascended and left. Yu sighed and turned around to look for something on the floor. When the mercenaries behind him saw this, they walked forward and asked curiously, "Sir, what are you looking for?" "I'll look for it for you." "No need. You won't find it. I don't even know what I'm looking for. I'll look for it myself." As Yu spoke, he lay on the floor and carefully looked for it. What he said just now was just an excuse. He stayed because he wanted to find the remaining purple crystals as soon as possible. He turned around and searched the deck. Finally, he found a few purple crystals scattered on the floor. He held them tightly in his palm as if they were his most precious treasure. "Great! I've finally found them." When he got home, he would string them together into a bracelet. He had to make it stronger and protect it carefully. He could not lose it so easily again. In the distance, another helicopter flew over and landed on the deck. The people on the deck were hopeful, but they did not dare to go forward. They were afraid of the 2 mercenaries beside Yu. They were well built and looked well trained. Moreover, they had guns in their hands. Bullets did not have eyes. Otherwise, they would have gone forward and boarded the rescue helicopter. Another mercenary walked down from the helicopter. You ordered him to bring Dyrus onto the helicopter. He planned to bring him back to Hurricane's headquarters to settle the score. And and only a handful of the people here. She's only 3 years old. Hearing this, Yu could not help but feel a little sympathetic for her. The girl in his arms did not know what was going on. She looked at him innocently with her big, watery eyes and sucked on her fingers. Yu looked at her, and his heart softened. In reality, he did not plan to save anyone on the ship. Most of the people who entered and exited this cruise ship were rich and ruthless nobles. They took human lives for fun just because they had a lot of money. Chapter 33:58. Some of them had lost their conscience, and such people were not worth saving. However, Yu thought of his mother when he saw the innocent child. If it was his mother, she would sacrifice herself to protect him. His heart softened when he thought of this. The woman continued to plead, "Please, the child is innocent." Yu was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking. Finally, he said calmly, "Bring the girl onto the plane." The woman's eyes lit up, and she immediately handed the little girl over to them. Thanking them profusely, Yu boarded the plane, and the mercenaries escorted Dyatrys into the cabin. Only then did they realize that Dyatrys had left a suitcase beside him. This old man did not forget to bring money with him, even when he was running for his life. The plane started slowly, and the propellers stirred up waves as it slowly rose into the air. When they were in the air and looking down at the cruise ship, Yu realized that the huge cruise ship had broken apart from the middle. Just as Xiaoyi-Chen had said, the cruise ship had hit a reef. It was probably a very hard reef that had split open the ship's belly. The bottom of the ship must have been split open. Endless seawater poured into the crack and into the cabin. The bottom 2 floors had probably been submerged by the seawater. The hull of the ship was very long, and its buoyancy was affected, causing it to sink continuously. The middle of the ship had also started to break apart due to the imbalance of gravity. Yu sat on the cruise ship with lingering fear. He did not dare to imagine that if his uncle's men had not arrived in time, the cruise ship would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. However, this was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was the desperate crowd on the ship. In the face of death, the most selfish instincts of human nature were revealed. Perhaps they would not be able to wait until the cruise ship sank and would be trampled to death by the crazy crowd. Yu heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could completely relax, he heard a man's sinister laughter behind him. Ha ha ha! Yu was shocked. He turned around and looked at Dyatrys. He did not know when he had woken up. This cunning man, if he was not sure that he was tied up tightly, he would have been nervous. However, he was clearly the one in the most passive position right now. So how could he still laugh? Yu asked coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Dietrich smiled, revealing a mouthful of sinister teeth. "I'm laughing at your naivety. What, do you really think you're safe now?" Naive? Who was the naive one? Yu snorted coldly, without any expression on her face. She did not want to talk to him anymore. But Dyatrys continued to ask, "Why didn't you leave me on the cruise ship? I don't think you're so kind-hearted as to really want to save me. Don't tell me you don't want me to die." Yu said, "I'm keeping you alive because we still have a score to settle between us." "Settle the score?" "Oh," Dyatrys replied curiously. "What do you want to settle with me?" "Mommy's debt, Xiaoyi-Chen's debt, and the debt between you and me. All of this should be accounted for. It just so happens that I also have a score that I want to settle with you. However, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to do so." "What do you mean, Before Yu could finish speaking, he saw Dietress's mouth move. He widened his eyes in confusion and saw that Dietress was grinning slightly. Between his lips, there was something black. Chapter 3359. It looked like a piece of plastic, but it wasn't as simple as plastic. He seemed to have been holding it in his mouth for a long time, embedded between his teeth. Yu took a closer look and saw that it was a mini mechanism. He instinctively raised his hand to protect his eyes. However, this thing didn't seem to be the hidden weapon he had imagined. Dietress bit the thing and exerted some force. Then he heard a long beep sound. A beep, beep, beep electronic sound came from his body. "What's that sound?" Yu ordered. "Go and take a look. Something on his body is making a sound." "Yes." The mercenary walked forward. Dietress stared at him like a tiger watching its prey, but his lips were curled into a smug and cold-blooded smile, as if he was determined to get his hands on him. "Behave yourself." The man punched him, and the thing in his mouth fell to the ground due to the huge inertia. He picked it up and looked at it. His eyes were shocked. He kicked Dietrich to the ground and lifted his clothes. Sure enough, he saw a small mini box on his waist. He opened the box and saw that it was a mini time bomb. The bomb had already started its countdown. 60 seconds were running out. You also saw the bomb on his body. He stood up and walked to Dietress's side, his eyes wide open in shock. "You, ha ha ha." Dietress laughed crazily. He knew that he was going to die. Even if Yu spared his life, he would make him wish he was dead. He had already expected this. Hence, the bomb on his body was his last resort. Dietress's lips split open, and he laughed arrogantly. "Ha ha ha. Since I'm going to die sooner or later, rather than die in your hands, why don't you accompany me to hell? How about it?" Yu was so angry that he gritted his teeth. The mercenary squatted down to study the bomb, but Dietress was calm. He said coldly, "I advise you not to move. Once this bomb is activated, it's only a matter of time before it explodes. Don't waste your time. Die with me. In your dreams." Yu immediately said, "Open the hatch and throw him into the sea." The mercenary nodded, squatted down, and nimbly removed the chains on his body. When they boarded the plane, in order to stabilize him, Yu had ordered people to tie him to the rack. Now, the chains were heavy, and it would take some effort to untie him. Dietrich laughed even more proudly. "You're too smart for your own good. When you've undone it, throw me into the sea. You won't be able to escape death. Shut up. Don't underestimate this bomb. It's so small, but I don't mind letting you see its power." Yu gritted his teeth and grabbed his collar, glaring at him. "Don't you dare. 30 seconds left. The bomb was about to explode. It's too late." He made a prompt decision. He knew that if they wasted time on unlocking the chains, they would really be buried with Dietrich. The mercenary opened the hatch and looked at the sea. He turned around and exchanged glances with Yu. He nimbly put an oxygen mask on Yu's face and hugged him in his arms. Yu immediately understood what he was going to do. "Are you crazy?" "Sir, I'm very conscious." Chapter 3360. You have to understand that if you jump from such a high plane, it's no different from falling from a 10-story building. Trust me. The mercenary carried him to the cabin door and hugged the child tightly. The other 2 mercenaries also approached. The pilot initiated the emergency landing procedure and walked to the cabin door as well. Mu Yaja walked to the back of the ship and looked into the distance. In midair, the helicopter was slowly approaching. It could be seen with the naked eye and would land in a few minutes. Yun, Shirshir, and Xiao Yichen had already been sent to the ship's medical team. Muyaja was only concerned about Yu, so he walked to the helipad to wait for him. Gong Jia was looking into the distance with a pair of binoculars when he suddenly noticed something. His eyes widened, and he was extremely shocked. What's going on? Mu Yaja, who had originally calmed down, immediately became nervous. He snatched the binoculars from Gong Jie's hands and saw the cabin door open. A few mercenaries stood at the cabin door in an orderly manner. The biting cold wind blew, and one of them was holding a child tightly. He recognized at a glance that the child in the man's arms was Yu. However, the strange thing was that they were planning to jump off the plane. Mu Yaja almost didn't have time to think. The next second, he saw 4 people jump out of the cabin door one after another. Their bodies were like feathers, lightly floating toward the sea. What's going on? Gong Jie also saw this scene. He rushed to the railing nervously and held the handrail nervously. However, there was a loud boom. Then, the helicopter exploded in an instant. It was as if a curtain of fire had exploded in the night sky. Even though they were far away, they seemed to be able to feel the air waves caused by the explosion. It was almost spreading toward them. The deck also shook, and the explosion caused strong waves on the sea. The ship was slightly jolted. Gong Jie was frightened, and his breathing suddenly stopped. Mu Yaja clenched his fists, but his gaze was fixed on the figure that kept falling toward the sea. His heart suddenly stopped beating. It seemed that the explosion had occurred in the cabin. The entire fuselage shook, and the propeller was broken and scattered. At that moment, it was as if the end of the world had arrived. The entire world was gray, and the turbulence was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The tragic fire and a cloud of fire instantly disintegrated the helicopter into ruins, and the black wreckage kept falling toward the sea. Mu Yaja's eyes suddenly turned red. Yu. Gong Jie was so shocked that his throat seemed to be blocked, and he could not make a sound. No. Yu was hugged tightly to the man's chest. His large palm protected the back of the boy's head as he buried his face in his chest. His large body formed a bundle that wrapped the boy in his embrace. He only felt that the two of them were in a straight parabola, like a sharp needle piercing through the air and piercing into the calm sea. The burning wreckage kept falling, and among them there was a broken propeller that smashed onto the man's back. There was a loud sound, and he seemed to have heard the sound of his back breaking. He was so nervous that he closed his eyes and fell into endless despair. Crash! Chapter 3361. Even though Yu was being held tightly in someone's arms, and the impact was reduced significantly, falling from a height of more than 20 meters and hitting the surface of the sea was undoubtedly the same impact as falling from a tall building. He held onto his breathing mask tightly and greedily sucked in the meager amount of oxygen. The mercenary who was holding on to him suffered a huge blow to the head. He suffered from intracranial hemorrhage and died on the spot. Even though he was already dead, he was still holding onto him tightly. Unfortunately, it was this kind of protection. Yu was locked tightly in his arms. As his body fell, he kept falling into the abyss. He was getting further and further away from the surface of the sea. He kept reaching out, but it was all in vain. Mommy, Yu struggled to open his mouth, and a string of vague syllables escaped. Daddy, brother, he kept struggling. His survival instinct made him want to live. More importantly, it was because he was worried about the person in his heart. Yao. The helicopter disintegrated in the air. The burning wreckage fell into the sea and floated on the surface of the sea. The sky was filled with smoke. At 5:00 in the morning, the sky was turning bright. The horizon stretched as far as the eye could see. 2 huge armed ships surrounded the area where Yu fell. The aircraft carrier was parked in the center. It lowered its speedboats and started to salvage the area. More than 10 speedboats rushed on the sea, cleaning up the floating oil on the surface of the sea at the fastest speed. A whole hour had passed. So many people had been sent out. So far, they had only salvaged the wreckage of the helicopter and an undamaged suitcase. The $500 million in the suitcase was still intact. Xiao Yichen was still unconscious. Yun Shishir was unconscious for a short while. When she woke up, her heart stopped beating when she heard the bad news. Yu had fallen into the sea. There was no news of him until now. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Yun Shishir could not take such a huge blow. She could not believe it. However, when she rushed out of the cabin and saw the scene in front of her with her own eyes, she finally believed that Yu had really fallen into the sea and disappeared. The reason for the fall was the explosion of the helicopter. However, the exact cause of the explosion was still unknown. Falling from a height of more than 20 meters into the sea, his life or death was unknown. Muyaja was still worried. He put on a diving suit and personally went to the sea to search for Yu. Gong Jia calmly commanded, while comforting the terrified Yun Shishir. Yun Shishir guarded the cabin and did not go anywhere. She was full of hope that the people in charge of the salvage would bring back good news. However, other than some wreckage, some parts, and a few floating corpses, there was no breakthrough. The deepest part of the sea was thousands of meters deep. So far, the people that were sent out were mainly searching within 300 meters of the sea surface. 300 meters was the maximum range that could be searched. The deeper parts of the sea were places that humans could not go. It was too dangerous and required the use of instruments. The ship was equipped with such instruments and had been thrown into the sea. However, the images that were sent back did not show any clues. They were already narrowing down the scope of the salvage operation. It would take a lot of effort just to salvage the wreckage, not to mention an 8-year-old child. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Sir, a diver came back to report that they had found a corpse. Yun Shishir stood up agitatedly, and her brother immediately asked her what kind of corpse it was. Chapter 3362. The diver said the body was chained up and his body was badly mutilated. However, after identification, we can confirm that he's from Diatrisborn. After a brief examination, we found that he had explosives tied to his body, so we can confirm the cause of the accident. Explosives? Yes, a suicide bomber. Gong Jie gritted his teeth in hatred. This sly old fox. Even in death, he wanted to take someone down with him. Before the oxygen in the oxygen tank ran out, Muyaja returned to the shore. He took off his diving goggles, looked back at the sea, and bit his lip hard. He had been searching for 2 hours without stopping. In the cold sea, he had almost exhausted all his energy. He ate some compressed biscuits to replenish his energy, changed his oxygen tank, and prepared to go back into the water. Gong Jie stopped him. Are you crazy? Unlike on land, the energy consumption in the sea is several times higher. Don't push yourself too hard. Muyaja turned around and looked at him. We don't know whether Yu is dead or alive. Do you want me to stay on the shore and do nothing? I can't do that. At least you should rest for a while. Gong Jie said again. If you consume too much energy, it'll be dangerous. I know what to do. Gong Jie wanted to say something, but Muyaja turned around and left quickly. Now, every minute and second was incomparably precious to him. The salvage operation lasted for 5 hours, but there was no news. The golden rescue period was slowly approaching, and the hope of survival was getting slimmer and slimmer. They found a few more bodies, but other than the bodies of the 3 mercenaries, there was still no news of the pilot. And Yu, for a moment, they felt that something was amiss. In such a short period of time, It was impossible for a person to fall too deep, let alone be washed too far away by the waves. Gong Jia had sealed off the sea area as soon as possible. Basically, Yu would only be in this area. So how could they not catch him? In the regenerated sea area, a person would not sink because the sea was buoyant. 300 meters was already very deep, and a person could not sink to a few thousand meters in such a short period of time. That would be inconceivable. Where could they have gone? Gong Jia was both anxious and worried. This sudden turn of events had caught him off guard. Yun Shishir was already on the verge of collapse. She stood guard on the boat. Even though she was exhausted, she didn't dare to close her eyes. He was worried that once he opened his eyes, the whole world would be turned upside down. The more time passed, and the more there was no news, the more she blamed herself. If it wasn't for her, Yu wouldn't be in such a dangerous situation. She was such a failure. What kind of danger did he encounter that he needed his two sons to save him? She also found out about Yu's other identity. She did not expect Yu to be related to the Hurricane Group. She also did not know that Yu was one of the core members of the Hurricane Group. She originally thought that Yu had a toy company that was currently being managed by Li Hanlin. She did not expect that he had an even deeper identity. She did not know much and did not have the heart to care, but she knew that the culprit who kidnapped her this time, Dytrus, was after Yu. Dytrus and the Hurricane Group had a deep grudge. Hence, even if he died, he swore to drag Yu down to hell with him. If she had known, but there was no such thing. She had been kept in the dark from the beginning. Chapter 3363. Yun Shishir was almost suffocating from the pain. If anything happened to Yu, she would never forgive herself. Too much time had passed, and all the people who went into the sea were exhausted. Gong Xiaojia naturally could not withdraw the team. If they could not salvage it in 5 hours, then they would spend 10 or even 20 hours. He did not believe that there would be no news at all. However, for now, no news was the best news. Hurricane headquarters. The medical center was on standby. The phone suddenly rang. Gong Xiaoying received the call, and his expression became serious. He led the team to the helipad. In the distance, a helicopter flew over slowly, circled once, and slowly landed on the helipad. The wind was a little strong. Gong Xiaoying narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at the helicopter that landed steadily on the helipad. His gaze became scorching hot. The cabin door opened, and a pilot in a sorry state jumped out. He was holding a child wrapped in a blanket in his arms and hurried to Gong Xiaoying. Gong Xiaoying asked in a low voice, "Is he okay?" The pilot took a deep breath, shook his head, and answered in a serious tone, "Boss, fortunately, he's fine. He's just hit the back of his head, and he's unconscious." Gong Xiaoying raised his hand and untied the blanket, revealing the child's delicate but pale face. The child's eyes were tightly shut. His long eyelashes were wet from the seawater, and his slightly greenish eyelids were probably frozen by the seawater. His skin was extremely cold, and there was no warmth. The seawater was cold, and after being soaked in it for a long time, his originally fair face was even paler than before. Because he was wearing an oxygen mask, there were dark red marks from his nose to his mouth. The oxygen mask had been removed. The child was still unconscious. Gong Xiaoying's expression changed slightly. He scrutinized the child's face carefully, and he was a little moved. Similar, very similar. Those eyebrows, those eyes, that perky nose, they were somewhat similar to Mu Qingqing's. They were similar in appearance and spirit. This child was very much like his grandmother, especially those eyes. They reminded him of her at first glance. However, due to his injuries, he looked extremely weak. Gong Xiaoying was well aware of the child's identity. Other than being his grandson, he was also one of the core people in charge of Project Heaven's Eye. For the past few years, he had been kept in the dark and didn't know anything. However, when Yu returned to the island with Gong Jia, someone leaked the news. When he returned to the headquarters, he heard some rumors. Following the clues, he quickly found out the child's identity. It turned out that his daughter had given birth to such a genius grandson. He had never believed that the person who came up with the Sky Eye plan was really an 8-year-old child. What was even more unbelievable was that this child was his grandson. At such a young age, he had already surpassed his master. He was proud of this, but he also felt that it was a pity that he had only just found out that Yu was his grandson. He couldn't help but sigh. How is he? Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. He immediately ordered, "Hurry up and send him to the medical center." At the medical center, the operating theater, Alice received the notice and rushed over. However, she was slightly stunned when she saw the child lying on the operating table. This child was not Gong Jia's. Back then, Gong Jia had threatened and bribed her to keep this secret from Gong Xiaoying. Chapter 3364. Gong Xiaoying was standing in front of the operating table. When he saw her, he called her over. "Alice." "Yes, this is my grandson. I'll hand him over to you. You must cure him." Alice was stunned for a long time until Gong Xiaoying's cold gaze landed on her. She hurriedly nodded and said, "Understood." She did not dare to disobey Gong Xiaoying's orders. Before she came, her subordinates had already done a series of precise examinations on the child. Other than some external injuries, a moderate concussion, and slight intracranial damage, the child's various functions could be said to be very poor. How poor? If these conditions were not improved, he would not live past 20 years. This was not an exaggeration. The medical elites gathered at the Hurricane Group's headquarters were definitely the best in the world. Basically, this was a conservative estimate. 20 years was still a relatively optimistic situation. The various functions of his organs were not optimistic, especially his organs. Yu's heart was naturally fragile and weak. Moreover, his physique was not satisfactory. Compared to Xiao Yichen's physique, Yu's physique had always been poor since he was born. After years of careful treatment, although there were some improvements year by year, it could be said to be minimal. Alice took the report and flipped through a few pages. Her expression was grave. "There's a big problem with his heart." "What problem?" "Congenital heart failure." When Gong Xiaoying heard this, his heart suddenly sank. According to Gong Jia, Alice said carefully, "This child was born prematurely. He was not even a month old. His older brother's physique is very strong. It's probably because he was deprived of nutrients in his mother's womb that he developed poorly." Gong Xiaoying's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. "You already knew about this child's existence." Alice's heart skipped a beat, and she did not speak for a moment. Gong Xiaoying's tone became more dangerous. "You hid it from me together with him." Alice lowered her head guiltily. Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it from you." "Forget it." Gong Xiaoying waved his hand expressionlessly and said coldly, "I know. This was all his idea." Alice remained silent. "You said that he has a heart problem. Then, is there a corresponding treatment plan?" Alice looked up and hesitated for a long time before she slowly said, "It's not that I don't have one. It's just that I need some time." Gong Xiaoying frowned. "How long is a little time?" 5 years. Alice continued. "Because I don't know what level it is, I can't say for the time being. However, it's not like there are no conditions that can be improved." "Do you need a heart transplant?" "No need." Alice said bluntly, "Even if it's a heart transplant, no matter how good the medical skills are, after the transplant surgery, They can't live more than 10 years. This is already the highest record in the medical field. Oh, Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at her. He said slowly, I'll leave this child to you. You must do your best for me. Yes. However, there's another thing that you have to remember. This child is now with me. You're not allowed to tell anyone about this. After a pause, Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully, including Gong Jia. Chapter 3365. But if this child regains consciousness and wants to return to his mother's side with his intelligence, no one can stop him from leaving this place. Alice said so. Gong Xiaoying smiled coldly when he heard this. He turned around and slowly sized her up. Alice, you should know what this child means to me. Alice nodded and said with a smile, this child is your grandson and your closest relative. He's very important to you. More importantly, this child is talented and is also the core figure of the Heavenly Eye Project. However, with Gong Xiaoying's stubborn personality, he could not accept Mu Yaja. After so many years, Gong Xiaoying's hatred for the Mu family had not disappeared at all. It was deep in his bones. This was not something that could be easily resolved with just a few words. However, Yu Yu had also made his position clear. He was on Mu Yaja's side. If Gong Xiaoying could not accept Mu Yaja, he would definitely not acknowledge Gong Xiaoying as his grandfather. This made Gong Xiaoying very sad. More than 10 years ago, the Mu family had taken away his love. Now, Mu Yaja had his daughter and grandson. He had also mentioned to Gong Jia that even if Yun Shishir left Mu Yaja, she would not be left with nothing. So far, the Hurricane Group had already dominated half of the arms industry. The Gong family was a big family. He did not care about Mu Yaja and the Xingyu Financial Group at all. However, father and son were connected. Yu Yu's dependence on Mu Yaja was not just a father-son relationship. He acknowledged that this man was enough to be his mother's support for the rest of her life. Therefore, he acknowledged him and defended him very much. However, Gong Xiaoying did not like him very much. Gong Xiaoying sneered and said, since you know, then you should know what to do. Alice was at a loss for words. Gong Xiaoying walked up to her slowly and said meaningfully, I heard that you used to be a hypnotist and an authority in the field of hypnotism. Alice's gaze shook as she looked at him in disbelief. Gong Xiaoying said faintly, I remember that you once used deep hypnosis to permanently seal part of the memories of an experimental subject. Yes, Alice nodded solemnly. If we use deep hypnosis, we can indeed achieve the method of sealing memories. But do we really have to do this? Her questioning made Gong Xiaoying faintly unhappy. Alice, don't forget your position. Yu is my grandson and my flesh and blood. I won't harm him. Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at the child lying on the operating table. He was so quiet that he looked like he was sleeping. His eyes were filled with unconcealable love. I didn't want to do this unless I had no other choice. He suddenly turned around and gritted his teeth as he said, I didn't want to do this either. But what can I do? I can't just watch this child return to that man's side. He already has enough. I definitely won't allow him to take Yu away. Alice could not help but want to refute. Yu was Mu Yaja's flesh and blood and was his beloved son. Doing this would be equally cruel to Yu and Mu Yaja. However, she did not have the courage to speak. After thinking for a long time, she finally nodded and said weakly, I know what to do. Okay. Chapter 3366. Gong Xiaoying said, I hope you don't disappoint me. After saying that, he turned around and walked away. Alice walked to the operating table and lowered her head to look at Yu Yu's young and delicate face. She hesitated for a moment before raising her hand to gently caress his face. Her red lips trembled slightly as she suddenly closed her eyes in desolation. I'm sorry. In the quiet room, no light could pass through. It was dark. Smack! A lonely light came on. Alice carried Yu to the sofa and adjusted his sitting position. In his half-awake state, Yu opened his eyes slightly. His consciousness was in a state of chaos, and he could not tell if he was in reality or in a dream. She walked to the phonograph, put in a disc, and played it softly. Soothing music sounded melodiously. Alice gently bent over in front of him and raised her hand. A pocket watch fell and swayed gently. Yu opened his hazy eyes. As the pocket watch swayed gently, his eyes gradually lost focus and became empty and dark. He suddenly felt a ray of sunlight above his head gradually sprinkling on his body, and his whole body was enveloped in warmth. Immediately after, he opened his eyes and saw an endless sea. Under the sunlight, the golden beach was beautiful and dazzling. He walked on the beach and looked around, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly, he had a splitting headache. A woman's gentle voice sounded. Who are you? Yu turned around warily, but there was no one in sight. Who's talking? The woman asked, What's your name? Yu answered without hesitation, Yun Tianyu. The woman asked, What did you see? Yu rubbed his eyes and turned around, only to see Mu Yaja standing behind him and smiling at him. The expression on his face suddenly became lively. Daddy! He leaped forward in joy, but when he reached him and opened his arms, he caught nothing but air. He was stunned. When he looked again, the person in front of him seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Daddy, he's not your daddy. What? Yu turned pale, with fright. Without waiting for him to question, the woman asked step by step, Who do you want to see the most? Who's talking? Yu asked blankly. He took a few steps back in shock and bumped into a soft body. He turned around in fright, only to see Yun Shishir standing behind him and smiling gently at him. Yu, come here. Mommy. Yu walked toward her in a panic. He was so scared that he was about to cry. Mommy. He reached out to grab Yun's hand, but in the blink of an eye, she was gone again. Mommy. He shouted hoarsely. Mommy. You heard someone calling his name again. He turned around and saw Xiao Yichen hugging Yueyao and playing on the beach. The two little lads were diligently building a fortress and having a lot of fun. Xiao Yichen called out to him, Yu, come over and play with us. You did not dare to go over. He was afraid that the two people in front of him would disappear again. Don't. Yu walked over hesitantly, feeling lonely and helpless. Don't leave me behind. Chapter 3367. I didn't. Yu frantically tried to explain. Brother, I didn't bully you. Then where's the amethyst bracelet I gave you? Yu quickly looked down at his wrist. The amethyst bracelet that he had been wearing was gone. Where's the bracelet? You lost it. Xiao Yichen carried Yueyao and said angrily, Yueyao, let's go. Ignore him. Yueyao looked at him coldly. She turned around and lay in Xiao Yichen's arms. Without looking at him again, she turned around and walked into the sea. Yu panicked and chased after her desperately. However, he saw Xiao Yichen carrying Yueyao further and further away. Half of his body was covered by the sea. Danger! Come back! Yu also rushed into the sea and shouted hysterically, Don't leave me behind! Brother, Yueyao, don't leave me behind! Wait for me! A wave hit him, and he was instantly swallowed by the seawater. The salty seawater kept rushing into his mouth. He struggled desperately between his lips and teeth, but his body kept sinking. He looked at the bottom of the sea. He struggled to open his eyes. As he breathed hard, Yunna's ferocious and terrifying face flashed across his eyes. It's you. Yu opened his mouth wide in shock. The seawater poured into his lungs. He grabbed his hands in despair, trying to grab hold of a life-saving straw. In the boundless sea, he could not grab hold of anything. He could only let the waves hit him. When he woke up again and opened his eyes, he was in a white room. The snow-white curtains, the snow-white walls, and the snow-white bed woke him up immediately. He sat up and looked around. There was no one in the room. He was completely flustered. He lifted the blanket and ran to the door. However, the door would not open no matter how hard he tried. He hit the door in despair and cried, "Mommy! Mommy! Daddy! Daddy, where are you? Xiao, Yichen, save me! Save me!" The door suddenly opened. He rushed out and saw a group of strangers standing there. They looked at him coldly and whispered in low voices, "An unwanted child. What a pity! He has no parents. Orphans, so pitiful." Yu said angrily, "I have Daddy. I have Mommy." A voice sounded above his head. "Everything you see is just a fantasy. You don't have a mother or a father. You liar." He turned around abruptly, but all he saw was darkness. When he turned around again, the group of people had already disappeared. He was in complete darkness, unable to see his own fingers. Beneath his feet, it was as if the ground had been hollowed out, a bottomless abyss. He cautiously took a step forward, yet he heard footsteps coming from ahead. Yu turned around with tears in his eyes, only to see Yin Shishir walking slowly with her back to him. She was dressed in white, and her black hair was tied up with a hairband. She looked gentle and beautiful. "Mommy!" Yu wiped his tears pitifully and chased after her. "Mommy, don't leave Yu behind. Mommy, give Mommy a hug." He chased after Yun Shishir and carefully grabbed the corner of her shirt. "Mommy, give Mommy a hug." She snapped back to her senses and slapped his hand away with a loud smack. "Who are you?" He was caught off guard and fell to the ground. He looked up blankly and saw Yun Shishir looking at him coldly. She said coldly, "I'm not your mommy." "Mom, don't call me mommy." Yun Shishir's face suddenly became fierce. She said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Chapter 3368. Boo-hoo, Yu finally broke down. He threw himself at her and hugged her waist as tears streamed down his face. "I'm Yu, Mommy. How can you not recognize Yu? Mommy, I'm Yu. I told you that you've got the wrong person." Yun Shishir pushed him away forcefully. Yu lost his balance and fell backward, falling into the abyss. "Ah," Yu cried in despair. Don't leave me behind. Don't leave me behind." When he woke up, the sky was overcast with dark clouds. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Yu stood on the gloomy grassland. He walked slowly and looked at the endless grassland. His body went limp and he knelt on the ground weakly. The woman's voice sounded again. "Who are you?" Yu looked up tiredly. When he opened his eyes, the dark clouds were overcast, just like his gloomy inner world. "Who am I?" He opened his dry lips and muttered to himself, "Who am I?" He couldn't remember. He only felt that he had an exhausting dream. When he woke up, he didn't know where he was or where he was. "What's your name?" The woman's voice was persuasive. "What's your name?" Yu opened his eyes wide in a daze. He muttered to himself in despair, "What's my name? What did you see?" Yu looked around and shook his head. "I don't know." The grass on the grassland started to wither. In an instant, it started to rain heavily. In the rain, he struggled to open his eyes. He allowed the rainwater to pour into his eyes. It was bitter and painful. In the rain, an unfamiliar man walked over. He stood in front of him and bowed, slightly. Yu looked at him in confusion, but did not react. "You know him?" "No." You shook his head. "Who is he?" "He's from the Mu family. The Mu family, his name is Muyaja. You muttered the name silently, but an unknown and unfamiliar feeling welled up in her heart. You hate him? Yu rubbed his eyes and tears fell. He did not know why he was crying. Hearing the woman's voice, he muttered doubtfully, "Should I hate him?" The man's figure gradually disappeared. In an instant, the world around him changed. Yu stood up. As far as his eyes could see, there was endless darkness. Below him was boiling hot lava, and in the middle of it were piles of white bones. The eerie fear invaded his heart. "Do you remember your name?" "I don't know." You shook his head. "I don't know anything." "Then what do you know?" You started to tremble. She tightened her shoulders and shivered. "I only know that I'm alone." He was alone. He was alone. "You're not alone." You looked up in disbelief. "You have a name." "I have a name." He stood up and complained. "Liar." "I don't have a name." "I don't have a name." "You have a name." The woman's voice said slowly, "Your name is," accompanied by a hoarse gasp. In the darkness, a pair of frightened eyes suddenly opened. A beam of moonlight reflected into the eyes, and the pupils suddenly contracted violently. The incandescent lamp above his head kept swaying, but the surroundings were pitch black. Under the dim light, the lonely shadow pulled at one's heart, and it was suffocating. Chapter 33:69. He was so tired. It was as if he was sitting in a deep nightmare. In his muddle-headed state, he dreamed of many strangers. The child stood up. His body swayed slightly as he looked around. In the medical center, people were walking back and forth. The cold light shone on his body, but he couldn't feel any warmth. He was wearing a snow-white hospital gown. The front of his gown was slightly open, and it was covered with thin sheets to detect his heartbeat and pulse. Alice walked over and smiled at him. "Fan, you're awake." He sat up slowly and held his forehead. He said, tiredly, "I seem to have had a very long nightmare." Alice smiled. "Nightmare? What kind of nightmare was it?" His gaze was slightly dazed, and he smiled. "Someone called my name, but that's not my name." "Oh, you," he said these two words numbly, and his expression was blank. He heard someone calling his name. You. The funny thing was, he even dreamed of a woman. He kept chasing after the woman's back view, but the woman didn't turn back. He had already forgotten the face of the woman in his dream. He couldn't remember it clearly. Alice was stunned. She thought to herself that he had already gone through deep hypnosis, and many of his memories had already been sealed. However, the name Yu was still deeply etched in his mind. It seemed that it would take some time to completely seal his memories. Alice hugged him gently and said gently, "Gong Fan, it's just a nightmare. When you wake up, just forget about it." When Gong Xiaoying walked in, Yu was lying on the operating table in a deep coma. He had just gone through the 6th level of hypnosis. His young face was drenched in cold sweat, and his eyelids were trembling violently. Suddenly, a line of tears slowly flowed down and wet his sideburns. Gong Xiaoying walked over and looked at him. Even though he was in a deep coma, the weakness and helplessness on his face were very obvious. To him, this might be a nightmare. However, in fact, his memories were being sealed bit by bit in the depths of his mind. Usually, there weren't many opportunities to use this method. Most of the time, only when some mercenaries retired, Alice would choose to seal all their memories related to the Hurricane Group before letting them go. However, mercenaries from the Hurricane Group would choose to retire in a very small number of cases. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Have his memories been sealed?" "We still need to observe him carefully." Alice sighed. "This is an extremely painful process." Gong Xiaoying suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he suddenly asked, "How painful is it?" This child is extremely attached to memories related to Yun Shirshir and Mu Yaja. He was very resistant at first, so the first attempt at hypnosis failed. Failed. Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully, "This word rarely comes out of your mouth." Alice looked up and said helplessly, "He's very resistant to the new name, Gong Fan. I rehearsed new memories for him, but he didn't accept it. He was very resistant. It was only until the third level of hypnosis that he barely succeeded." As an experienced hypnotist, Alice could replace those old memories with new ones if she used advanced hypnosis skills. Chapter 3370. Gong Xiaoying gave him the name Gong Fan. Alice hypnotized him into a dream. In the dream, she guided him patiently and led him to accept new memories. She instilled in him that his name was Gong Fan, the eldest son of the third generation of the Gong family. He grew up in the Gong family and was the core person in charge of the Deva Eye project. He was also one of the candidates to inherit the Hurricane Group in the future. She also instilled hatred for the Mu family in him. Now, he was already at the 5th level of hypnosis. If there were no accidents after the 10th level of hypnosis, he would completely forget those memories. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Will he still remember those memories in the future?" He was more concerned about this. Alice shook her head. Memories can never be erased. They can only be sealed. However, it will be very difficult to recall them if they are deeply sealed. Gong Xiaoying's heart calmed down slightly. He lowered his head and looked at Yu Yu's sweaty face. However, he heard Alice say worriedly, "This child has two personalities." "Dual personality?" "Yes," Alice said. "One is innocent and the other is dark." Dual personality meant that a person had two relatively independent and separate personalities. It was a relatively serious psychological disorder. Generally speaking, a normal person would have two or more ways of thinking at the same time. Human nature itself carried an evil side. The evil side was usually accompanied by a strong desire and ambition. The two personalities had independent memories and usually did not interfere with each other. However, Yu Yu had a dual personality. This surprised her a little. The innocent side was his true side and also his initial personality. The dark side came from the dark scenes of his childhood. It was influenced by his ears and eyes, so the second personality was split. However, this second personality had always been suppressed by the innocent side and was rarely stimulated. Yu wanted to protect Yun Shirshir. He did not hold back, rely on, and yearn for his mother. Therefore, the innocent and kind side had always been suppressed by the second personality. It would only be separated under special circumstances. Alice entered Yu's memories and discovered this personality. She also discovered all the dark memories in this personality. These memories did not interfere with the memories of the original personality. However, after Alice sealed the memories of Yun Shirshir and erased the memories of Mu Yaja, Xiao Yichen, and Yueyao, the original personality quickly disappeared. The second personality took over his body and completely took over his body. Alice said calmly, "His original personality has completely disappeared." She was a little annoyed. In the dream, Yu struggled fiercely. She kept setting up desperate and miserable dreams for him in order to seal those memories. However, what was left behind was a child who looked like a walking corpse. Gong Xiaoying remained silent. He turned around and asked slowly, "Is there a preliminary treatment plan for his heart problem?" "No," Alice said. "It will take a long time to set up a treatment plan. After all, I don't know enough about his condition." "Do it as soon as possible." "Understood." Alice returned to the operating table and gently placed her right hand on his forehead. Fine cold sweat quickly soaked her palm. "No." Chapter 3371. "No." In his dream, he was running frantically on the surface of the sea. He kept looking behind him and saw a child who looked exactly like him walking towards him. The child looked at him coldly. His eyes were cold and gloomy on his handsome face. He was dressed in pitch-black clothes, as if he had become one with the night. He looked exactly like him. However, on his palm-sized face, his black hair was sharp and his eyes were deep. His thin lips were pursed tightly and his eyes were cold. "It's useless." The young man in black's voice was cold and indifferent. It was as cold as a piano on the sea. He walked slowly on the sea. He was calm and elegant. Even when the black waves hit him, he didn't move an inch. Even though you was running pathetically, he couldn't shake him off no matter how hard he tried. "You can't escape. No, don't come over." You ran forward like a madman. Beneath his feet was a dark sea. Through the shallow water, he seemed to see an endless abyss at the bottom of the sea. It was as if it was going to swallow him whole. Sharks swam around while wagging their tails. They opened their mouths from time to time, revealing their bloody mouths, rubbing his eyes. Yu stepped on the seawater and ran toward the sea surface not far away. "Save me, save me." He looked back from time to time, but the young man in black was getting closer and closer to him. He exclaimed and ran. However, in the blink of an eye, the young man's figure flashed and appeared in front of him. He was caught off guard and bumped into the young man. Yu was hit hard by the inertia, and his body leaned backward. The young man in black held his hand tightly and pulled him in front of him. He held his shoulders. You finally saw his face clearly. He had a fair face and a pair of dark eyes that hid traces of scarlet. He had a high-nosed bridge and thin lips. When he smiled, he revealed his white teeth. "Where are you going?" Yu asked cautiously. Who are you?" "Who am I?" The black-clothed youth tilted his head, his voice as cold as ice. "I am you." "You are lying." You shook her head. "What are you trying to do? I've had enough of you." The black-clothed youth sneered arrogantly. You, from today onwards, let me replace you, and you are not worthy of existence." "What?" The black-clothed youth tightly gripped his shoulder and pulled him into his embrace. He used so much strength that it was as if he wanted to fuse into his own flesh and blood. "Let's become one. Let me replace you." You struggled incessantly. However, the difference in strength was too great. He could only feel his body gradually turning into smoke and fusing with the black-clothed youth's body. "No." Yu's eyes were filled with tears. Don't be afraid." The black-clothed youth smiled coldly and grabbed the back of his neck. As he lowered his head, his cold eyes slightly opened, revealing a sharp edge. "From now on, I am you, and you will be reduced to ashes." "No, Yun Shirshir was so shocked that she sat up on the bed. She had woken up from a nightmare and was covered in cold sweat. She looked around. In the dark bedroom, Xiao Yichen was sleeping beside her. He was frowning slightly, but did not wake up. Only then did she realize that she had just had a nightmare. Chapter 3372. Yun Shirshir lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She hurriedly took out her car keys and left the house. She walked to the garage and sat in the driver's seat. She started the car with trembling hands and slowly drove out of the garage. When Xiao Yichen woke up, it was already midnight. He instinctively reached out, but the side of the bed was empty. "Mommy?" He instantly woke up. He sat up and called out, "Mommy?" There was no response in the empty room. Xiao Yichen immediately got out of bed and walked to the living room. He did not see Yun Shirshir. Mu Yaja leaned against the sofa. He was exhausted from the night of searching. He walked over and gently pushed his shoulder. "Daddy?" Muyaja was not in a deep sleep. When he woke up, he opened his eyes and saw that it was his father. What's wrong? Mommy is missing. What? Muyaja took his jacket and walked into the garage. He realized that the Mercedes-Benz was gone. It had probably been driven away. Xiao Yichen asked anxiously, "Where did Mommy go?" "I know where she went." Muyaja bowed and said, "Get in the car." Okay. The father and son got into the car and drove toward the harbor. For the past 3 days, Gongjia had deployed more than 10 patrol boats to carry out a large-scale salvage operation. The area where Yu had gone missing was getting smaller and smaller. However, the area where Yu had gone missing was expanded to 10 nautical miles. Not a single corner was missed. A large-scale search was carried out, but there was still no news. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. Dozens of underwater robots dove a few thousand meters into the sea to investigate, but they still could not find any clues. However, even though the cost of salvaging alone was a few million USD per day, no one said that they would give up. No news was the best news so far. However, as time passed, Gongjia's faith was gradually eroded. The golden rescue time was within 72 hours. 72 hours were about to pass. This meant that Yu's chances of survival were very slim. However, if he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. He would not give up. The car arrived at the port. Muyaja got out of the car and walked to the port. The huge port was noisy. He suddenly thought of a place. He picked up Xiao Yichen and ran towards the beach. At dawn, the horizon shimmered faintly. Muyaja walked to the seaside and saw Yun Shishir standing by the seaside. She was staring at the sea, motionless. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he turned pale with fright. He struggled to jump out of Muyaja's arms and ran over to Yun Shishir, hugging her tightly from behind. "Mommy!" He looked up and saw that Yun Shishir had been staring at the sea since the beginning. Her eyes were red and swollen, and they were filled with despair and numbness. Xiao Yichen calmed down slightly. He walked in front of Yun Shishir and held her hand tightly. He comforted her and said, "Mommy, don't worry. You will be fine." She had not closed her eyes for 2 days and 2 nights. She was in a daze. Muyaja coaxed and lied to her. He sent her home to rest, but she dreamed that Yu was swallowed by the sea. She woke up with a start. Yun Shishir clenched her fists tightly. She suppressed her emotions and said in a trembling voice, "Is there still no news of Yu?" Chapter 3373. Xiao Yichen quickly comforted her. "Mommy, don't let your imagination run wild. Didn't Uncle say that they haven't found him yet? This means that Yu is still alive." Yun Shishir took a deep breath and slowly squatted on the ground. She wrapped her arms around her knees and said in despair, "Xiao Yichen, Yu has fallen into the sea. Even if we send more people to search for him day and night, it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack. The sea is so big, and the depth is a few thousand meters. 72 hours have passed. Do you think that Yu will be safe and sound? Will he really be okay?" Xiao Yichen was silent for a moment. Even he couldn't guarantee that Yu would be okay. But he had been waiting for a miracle. Yun Shishir held her forehead in despair and said, "For the past 3 days, I've been lying to myself. You will be fine. You will be safe. But I can't lie to myself anymore." She finally broke down and knelt on the ground. Tears flowed out of her eyes and down her cheeks. She cried pitifully, "It's my fault. It's all my fault." No matter what he said back then, I shouldn't have let go of his hand. Little Yichen reached out and hugged her tightly as he burst into tears. "Mommy, don't scare me, okay?" He didn't know what to do. The news of Yu's disappearance was like the end of the world to him. But He held on and didn't dare to break down easily because he still had to take care of his mother and sister. If he couldn't recover, what would happen to his mother? Yun Shirshir felt the same way. She had been deceiving herself and others, believing that Yu would be safe and sound. No one dared to give up easily. She knew that if she broke down, it would be twice as painful for Xiao Yichen and Mu Yaja. Gu Xingzi's departure had been a huge blow to her. During that period of time, Mu Yaja watched over her day and night, afraid that something would happen to her. Yu and Xiao Yichen stayed by her side. She didn't want to relive those days. However, she was barely holding on because she believed that Yu would be fine. However, 3 days had passed. Every minute and every second was torture, incomparable torture. She closed her eyes, but the nightmares continued. She began to be afraid of closing her eyes. She was afraid that if she woke up, she would be waiting for bad news, waiting for the end of the world. Xiao Yichen hugged her and suddenly said, "Mommy, I believe that Yu will be alive, and well, we can't live without him, and he can't live without us." Back then, Yun Na and Li Qin were thrown into the sea by Li Dongqiang, but they didn't die in the end. Gong Jia said that he had sent as many people as he could to search for them. They didn't even let go of a few thousand meters under the sea. He swore that if anything were to happen to Yu, even if he were to die, he would definitely be able to find his corpse. However, there was no news for a few days. Gong Jia suspected that Yu was no longer in this area. There were a few islands near that area. He had already sent patrol boats to investigate. If there was any news, they would definitely be able to find Yu's whereabouts. Mu Yaja looked at the backs of the mother and son, who were leaning against each other. He suddenly loosened his clenched fists and slowly walked behind Yun Shirshir. His heart ached as he hugged her shoulders. "It's okay." Chapter 3374. He said firmly, "The little guy is so lucky. He'll be fine." Yun Shirshir gripped the back of his hand tightly. She used so much force that she almost broke his skin. He knew that she was enduring it. The fact that there was no news of Yu was like the sky falling down on her. Mu Yaja hugged her tenderly and kissed her forehead gently. He said gently, "Shirshir, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home." Wait for Yu to come home. These words had undoubtedly touched her deeply. Big drops of tears rolled down her cheeks. Little Yichen wiped away his tears at once and gave a solemn smile. "Yes, Mommy, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home." Mu Yaja coaxed her gently. "So be good and stay at home and wait for Yu to come home, okay?" Yun Shirshir's lips trembled violently. She looked up and widened her eyes. Choking, she said, "No matter how long it takes, I'm willing to wait. But will he come back to us?" "Why not?" Mu Yaja hugged her tightly. His voice was slightly hoarse as he said, "That guy is so clingy to you and likes to pester you. It's as if it's killing him to be away from you for a day. He always likes to chase after you. Mommy this, and Mommy that. How can he not want you? How can he not come home?" Little Chen added, "That's right. You can't leave Mommy, even if he leaves the air. He'll definitely come back. Otherwise, where else can he go?" Yun Shirshir couldn't stop her tears anymore. She nodded pathetically. Ever since Yu was born, he had been like her little tail that she couldn't shake off, no matter how hard she tried. She recalled how the little guy was extremely unwilling to spend time with Mu Yaja. He hugged her and said coquettishly, "Mommy, you belong to Yu alone. Yu doesn't want Daddy. Yu only wants Mommy." She still remembered when she brought him to Fairy Tale Valley to play. Even though she couldn't participate in many of the activities, she still smiled brightly. Back at the hospital, when she treated Xiao Yichen slightly better, he would make things difficult for her unwillingly, until she said seriously, you know what? Mommy doesn't belong to you alone. At that moment, Yu's eyes reddened. How could he not know that she also had feelings and free will? However, only the heavens knew how much mental work he had done before he let go and accepted Mu Yaja and Xiao Chen. He had always been stingy and unwilling to share his mother's love with anyone else. However, he accepted Xiao Chen and Mu Yaja from the bottom of his heart. No matter what choice Mommy makes, I will definitely be by Mommy's side, because you can't live without Mommy, and Mommy can't live without you either. Since the beginning of his life, they had depended on each other for survival. She was the brightest dawn in his life, and the warmth that he couldn't bear to part with. Yu's love for Xiao Chen and Mu Yaja was mostly because he loved them both. When they got home, Mu Yaja carried Yin Shirshir to the bed and lay down beside her. He hugged her gently and said calmly, "Rest well. Don't let your thoughts run wild." Yin Shirshir suddenly turned around and threw herself into his arms. She hugged him tightly and greedily absorbed the warmth from his body. "Don't leave me." The man's lips curled into a smile. "Yes, I'll stay with you. I won't go anywhere." Chapter 3375. He hugged her for a long time before he slowly fell asleep. However, Xiao Chen was no longer sleepy. He pushed open the bedroom door and was greeted with a cold and empty room. He turned on the lights, and the room instantly lit up. He walked to the bed and sat on his side. This bed was his, and Yu's bed. Ever since they moved here, they had been sleeping on the same bed. He was the one who suggested it. At first, Yu was very against it. However, he met such a clingy older brother and insisted on sleeping with him, saying that he was afraid of the dark. He still remembered how Yu drew a line on the bed and said, arrogantly, "You're not allowed to cross the line. You understand? If you cross the line, I understand." He lay down on the bed and pointed at the line. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, "I'm not allowed to cross the line, right? I understand." However, no matter how well he planned it, every time he slept in the middle of the night, he would find himself in all sorts of weird positions and squeezed to Yu's side. Sometimes his calf would be on his stomach. Sometimes his arm would be on his chest. Sometimes he would feel cold in his sleep, and he couldn't help but hug Yu. Yu couldn't sleep well because of him and would throw a tantrum at him the next day. However, he gradually got used to it. Xiao Yichen's sleeping posture was naturally terrible. No matter how much he warned himself before he slept that he had to lie upright and not move around, he knew that his sleeping posture must be terrible when he saw Yu's ashen face when he woke up. However, as time passed, their relationship got better. Yu was arrogant on the surface, but many mornings when he woke up, he would find Yu hugging him gently and sleeping quietly. What was even more incredible was that as long as Yu hugged him, he would be like a gentle kitten and wouldn't move around. The feeling of being hugged by him was very warm. Therefore, even though he was very sleepy, he could not bear to break this warmth. But now, the bed was empty. The spot where Yu slept was cold and cheerless. He sat on the bed for a long time before he suddenly opened his palm. 2 amethysts lay quietly in his palm. It was the amulet that Yu had secretly stuffed into his hand before they left. "Xiao Yichen, you have to be well." In his hazy state, he heard Yu whisper into his ear. Unknowingly, her eyes became slightly moist again. Xiao Yichen wiped the corners of his eyes sadly and looked up at the ceiling. He wanted to force his tears back, but even so, they still flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. "Don't cry." He gently pressed his index finger against his lips and muttered, "Don't cry, don't cry." Tears welled up in his eyes. He bit his lip hard and kept warning himself. Mu Ichen, you can't cry. Mu Ichen. Yu Yu's angry voice suddenly came from behind him. Useless. You only know how to cry. Xiao Ichen was shocked. He turned around, but there was no one behind him. He bit his index finger as tears flowed out of his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He lowered his head and looked at the two amethysts. Suddenly, he clenched them tightly and walked to the desk. He took a tool and carefully connected the two amethysts with a red string. Chapter 3376. He rubbed the pendant gently with his fingers and muttered to himself sadly, Yu, when are you coming home? Don't tell me you don't want to go home? Am I always making you angry? I promise I won't do it again. I won't tease you on purpose or make you unhappy anymore. Xiao Ichen pursed his lips and said, The important thing is, when are you coming home? He returned to the bed and lay down quietly, looking at the empty space beside him. He reached out his arms in a daze, imagining you lying beside him. He wanted to hug him, but his arms grabbed nothing. Xiao Ichen's nose stung again. He gritted his teeth, clutched the blanket tightly, and let out a helpless whimper. He had a long and heavy dream, and it was so oppressive that he almost couldn't breathe. In the dream, the entire sky was gray and overcast with dark clouds. It gave off a very heavy feeling, and there was a strong aura of destruction. He looked around blankly and saw that he was standing on a withered sea. The seawater beneath his feet was rotten as if it had been soaked in ink. He tried to take a step forward and was actually able to stand firmly on the surface of the sea, without falling. He suddenly realized that he was in a dream. Usually, when he was in a dream, no matter how bizarre it was, he would not realize that he was in a dream. But now his consciousness was exceptionally clear. Mu Ichen walked on the surface of the sea in a daze. The waves hit his body, but he didn't feel any pain. He didn't know when he would wake up from this dream. A youth in black stood in the distance with his back facing him. He looked lonely and cold. Mu Ichen walked over in confusion and asked hesitantly, Who are you? The youth in black had his back facing him and didn't say a word, as if he didn't hear him. Mu Ichen walked closer and raised his voice slightly. Who are you? The youth in black finally reacted, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he walked forward. Mu Ichen suddenly felt strange and quickened his pace to catch up with him. The black-clothed youth walked casually, as if he was taking a stroll in a garden. Mu Ichen chased after him until he was out of breath. From time to time, waves would hit him, hindering his footsteps. Wait! The young man gave him an extremely familiar feeling. Mu Ichen quickened his pace and finally caught up with her. He said, Wait! The black-clothed youth seemed to have finally heard his words. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, but his back was still facing him. Mu Ichen stopped in his tracks and panted for a moment. He stretched out his hand and gently clasped his shoulder. Who are you? Just as her hand touched his shoulder, she felt a gust of cold air pressing against her. He couldn't help but retract his hand, but he saw the black-clothed youth turn his head slightly, and a handsome and familiar face immediately entered his eyes. Yu, Mu Ichen became nervous. Yu, why are you here? The black-clothed youth turned slightly and looked back at him. His empty and dark eyes seemed to be puzzled. Yu? This name seemed extremely unfamiliar. The black-clothed youth repeated it silently and sneered. Who's Yu? Mu Ichen's heart clenched tightly. You, don't you recognize me? I'm your brother. The black-clothed youth sized him up coldly, and his lips curved into a thin smile. Brother? Chapter 3377. Big brother. His voice was as cold as ice, devoid of any warmth. Xiao Yichen suddenly felt that the young man in front of him was extremely unfamiliar. Even though his facial features and eyes were exactly the same as Yu Yu's, his cold, affectionate gaze and empty eyes without any warmth or focus made him feel like a stranger. He seemed to be very different from the gentle and cute Yu Yu in his memory. Even though Yu Yu would occasionally show a cold expression, it was definitely not this kind of coldness. It was as if the coldness came from his bones. It made him shudder. Mu Yichen looked at him with concern and said in a trembling voice, "Have you forgotten who I am? I'm your brother, Mu Yichen." "Let go." The young man's voice was cold and had a hint of hostility that was hard to ignore. Mu Yichen hugged his shoulders in heartache. Hot tears kept falling from the corners of his eyes onto the young man's thin shoulders. "Yu Yu, what's wrong with you? Are you really Yu Yu? Why can't you recognize me? How can you not remember your brother?" The youth remained indifferent to his helplessness and tears. His eyes stared blankly in the direction of the sea, not paying too much attention to him. Xiao Yichen looked up and held his face. He asked anxiously, "Where are you? Why didn't you come back? Mommy, Daddy, little sister, and I are waiting for you to come home. When are you coming home?" The young man's cold eyes closed indifferently, and then opened again indifferently. His pitch-black pupils were like an abyss, without any focus. He could not even see his own reflection in his eyes. "Yu Yu," Xiao Yichen hugged him tightly and refused to let go. "Yu Yu, can you not scare me? Take a good look at me. Can't you recognize me?" Hearing this, the young man pushed him away coldly and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "You've got the wrong person." After saying that, he turned around and walked away slowly. Xiao Yichen saw this and quickly chased after him. He reached out to grab his arm, but the young man waved him away expressionlessly. "Don't follow me anymore." Xiao Yichen's body fell to the surface of the sea. The seawater splashed up and surrounded him, but he struggled to get up and chased after him. "Yu Yu." He used all his strength to catch up to him. In a flash, he was in front of him and picked up the pendant around his neck. The two amethysts were reflected in the young man's of light. The young man was attracted by the pendant, and his eyes became somewhat focused. "You really don't remember?" Little Yichen displayed the pendant and lamented bitterly. "This is the amulet you gave me. I have the exact same purple crystal bracelet that I gave you as a gift. You said you liked it very much and would never leave it. You wore it all the time. You didn't even want to take it off when you were bathing. To protect me, you accidentally broke this bracelet. You blamed yourself and felt sorry for it. You risked your life to find these amethysts. Before we left, you gave it to me as an amulet. Yu Yu, do you really not remember? Have you really forgotten?" The young man was silent for a long time. He looked at the pendant and felt that it was unfamiliar. He looked up at him again and said coldly, "Get lost." He pushed Xiao Yichen away. Behind the young man, a stormy sea that was dozens of meters high suddenly rose and covered him. Chapter 3378. Xiao Yichen held his breath in shock. In the next second, the waves hit him and pushed him deep into the sea. Xiao Yichen opened his mouth, and the salty seawater flowed into his mouth continuously. For a moment, he felt suffocated and had difficulty breathing. It was so real that it didn't feel like a dream at all. It felt so real that it really happened. He opened his eyes and saw the young man gracefully stepping on the water and leaving calmly. He opened his mouth and wanted to call his name, but all he could do was drink a few mouthfuls of bitter seawater. On the bed, Xiao Yichen suddenly opened his eyes. His eyelashes were wet with tears, and they kept rolling down from the corners of his eyes. It was a dream. He had an exhausting nightmare. Outside the window, the sun had already risen. The first rays of the morning sun shone on the back garden, and it was full of vitality. He sat up in shock and looked around. In the empty room and on the balcony, he could vaguely see a figure's back. The child was wearing a white shirt and standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Through the clear glass, he could see the garden full of Chinese roses. Mu Yichen looked at the figure's back and clenched his fists nervously. His back stiffened, and he gently got off the bed and walked to his side. When his eyes regained focus, he finally recognized that the person in front of him was Yu. He opened his mouth in shock and only managed to say one word. You pretended to be mysterious and covered his mouth. He turned around and opened his eyes that were as bright as the stars. His distinct eyelashes made his eyes look watery and beautiful. Mu Yichen, look. Mu Yichen looked in the direction he was pointing at and saw the garden full of Chinese roses in full bloom. It's so beautiful. Yu smiled and said, Mu Yichen, I have to go. When I'm not around, you must take good care of Mommy and Yao. Yes, and that stinky daddy. Mu Yichen widened his eyes in shock. Leave. Yu placed her hands behind her back, obediently. She turned around and looked at him with a bright smile. You have to take care of yourself when I'm not around. Yu. Mu Yichen nervously reached out to grab his sleeve. Where are you going? His hand grabbed nothing but air. He looked down at his hand and tried to touch him again, only to find that his hand had passed through his body. His body was gradually becoming transparent. It was as if he had become immortal. Mu Yichen was so shocked that he took half a step back. He stared at the scene before him in disbelief. Yu suddenly opened her arms and threw herself into his embrace. She sobbed. Xiao Yichen instinctively wanted to protect him, but his hands went through his body again. He was so scared that his whole body started to tremble. Yu, where are you going? Mu Yichen finally couldn't control his emotions and broke down crying. Yu, don't go. Yu looked up and only smiled. Gradually, her body became more and more transparent and slowly disappeared from his embrace. Yu. Mu Yichen woke up again and sat up in bed in shock. It was only when he opened his eyes and saw the glaring sunlight outside the window that he realized that it wasn't real. It was a dream within a dream. Chapter 3379. Xiao Yichen's gaze fell on the pendant around his neck. He gently lifted the pendant and rubbed it with his fingers. Perhaps it was because it had been attached to his skin for a long time, but it was not as cold as it seemed. He got up and went to the shower room to take a shower. He had a nightmare and was covered in cold sweat. He took a hot shower and changed into a clean set of clothes. After washing up, he walked to the baby's room. In the crib, little Yao was playing with a toy. Xiao Yichen walked over curiously and leaned against the railing as he watched her in a daze. Usually, Yu liked to lie beside the crib and watch little Yao play with her toys. Yao was still so young, so the toys she liked were also very childish. Sometimes, even if it was a doll that couldn't make a sound, sing, or move, she would still hold it in her hands and play with it with relish. Children's interests were often so simple and cute. Toys that were particularly boring in the eyes of adults were treasures in the eyes of children. However, Yu did not feel impatient. Instead, she was very patient and did not seem to get tired of looking at them. Little Yao's favorite toy was a rainbow pony that Yu had given her. Usually, she liked to hug it to sleep. When she woke up, she would still hug it and never leave its side. The rainbow pony was snow white, and only its tail was rainbow-colored. Therefore, it was inevitable that it would get dirty if she kept playing with it. The nanny wanted to wash it, but little Yao refused to let go and refused to give it to her. She even cried and threw a tantrum. In the end, Yu thought of a way to trick the little girl. She personally washed the rainbow pony, disinfected it, and carefully ironed its tail. The most unique thing about this rainbow pony was its tail. It was a real ponytail. Therefore, it was a limited edition Luzhy mascot. Little Yueyao loved it so much that she could not put it down. Little Yueyao was playing happily. When she looked up and saw Xiao Chen, she turned her face away arrogantly and ignored him. Her arrogant attitude was exactly the same as Yu Yu's. He didn't think so before. But looking at it now, wasn't it a replica of Yu Yu? Back then, when Yu Yu had faced him, she had also given him the cold shoulder. She was arrogant, proud, and sharp-tongued, but deep down, she was extremely gentle. Little Yueyao suddenly noticed something. Her gaze landed on the pendant around Xiao Yichen's neck. She stared at the two amethysts, and her beautiful eyes suddenly curved into crescents as she smiled. He smiled, revealing two sharp teeth that had just emerged from his gums. Bro, she uttered two vague syllables. Xiao Yichen was stunned. Yueyao pointed at the crystal around his neck with an innocent look on her face. Big brother, are you calling Yu Yu? Xiao Yichen looked at the little girl in disbelief. His fingers gently caressed the amethyst pendant around his neck, and his eyes lit up. Yueyao, say it again. Bro. Yueyao clapped her hands excitedly, and her tender but moved around on the bed. Then she flipped over and climbed to the railing. Her two small hands gripped the railing tightly, and her pair of chubby little legs squatted on the bed like a little frog. Then she slowly used her body to climb up the railing. Even though her legs were trembling badly, she still managed to climb up steadily. Chapter 3380. Brother. Xiao Yichen heard her clearly and was instantly overjoyed. He immediately picked up Yueyao and hugged her happily. Then he gently rubbed his face against hers. Yueyao, you must have recognized that this belongs to Yu, right? Little Yueyao lay in his arms. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she sized up the amethyst necklace and fiddled with it with her hands. A child's memory was very limited. The things that she could remember were very limited. However, Yueyao was a very intelligent child. When Yu was around, he liked to accompany her the most. Therefore, she was very familiar with Yu. Sometimes, whenever Yueyao was awake, Yu would push open the door and enter. Yueyao could hear his footsteps and could acutely identify who it was. Sometimes, when she smelled the fragrance on Yu's body, she would excitedly kick her legs. Yueyao could not speak yet, and her ability to think was limited. Therefore, it was very difficult to say who Yueyao liked the most. There were many different opinions. Everyone thought that Yueyao liked them the most. However, in reality, Yueyao was the most excited when Yu was near her. Yueyao was very familiar with Yu. Therefore, when she saw the amethyst necklace on Xiao Yichen's neck, the little girl was very smart. She immediately knew that it belonged to Yu and danced with joy. However, she seemed to have mistaken Xiao Yichen for Yu. After all, the two children looked very similar. In addition, Yueyao was so small. Therefore, the little girl originally ignored Xiao Yichen. However, when she saw the necklace on his neck, she became excited. Bro, carrot, Xiao Yichen couldn't help but tear up. He hugged Yueyao tightly. He had just woken up from a nightmare and was exhausted, but because of her words, he finally couldn't hold back his tears. Bro, little Yueyao didn't understand his tears. He fiddled with the amethyst with great interest, as if he couldn't bear to part with it. She didn't understand Mu Yichen's grief and heartache, and she couldn't read his tears either. She was completely attracted to the purple crystal. Seeing how much she liked it, Xiao Yichen returned to his room and took the purple crystal apart. There were 2 of them in total, so he made 2 of them. When he returned to the baby's room, he tied the anklet that he had made around the little Yueyao's ankle. One for you, one for me. Xiao Yichen fiddled with the amethyst pendant and smiled at her. But you're not allowed to lose it. This is the amulet you gave us. Little Yueyao hugged her ankle. For a moment, she lost her balance and fell on the bed. Xiao Yichen was amused. As he laughed, his tears dried up unknowingly. The little guy finally knew how to speak, but the first word he learned was not daddy or mommy, but brother. This made him not know whether to laugh or cry. If Yu were here, he would be beaming with joy, right? Even in his dreams, he wanted to hear little Yueyao call him brother. However, he did not mention it to Yun Shirshir, as he was worried that his mommy would think of him when she saw it. The salvage work was still going on in an orderly manner. Gong Jie deployed 2 more patrol boats. The lineup was so huge that it almost affected the sea route hub. However, half a month had passed, and there was still no news of the baby. Chapter 3381. Yun Shirshir was not willing to give up even the slightest chance. Apart from sleeping, she spent most of her time on the ship waiting for news. However, half a month had passed, and there was still no news. Even so, no one said that they wanted to give up. Xiao Yichen firmly believed that Yu was definitely still alive. Perhaps it was because of the special telepathy between the twins. Sometimes he would dream. In his dreams, he would often see Yu. However, Yu had become more and more unfamiliar to him. His back was always facing him. No matter how much Xiao Yichen shouted his name, he remained indifferent. It was as if there was an invisible wall between them, and he could not hear his voice. However, Xiao Yichen firmly believed that Yu was definitely still alive. He told Yun Shirshir about this dream, and Yun Shirshir also thought that it was magical. Originally, she did not believe in something as bizarre as telepathy. However, this was not the only case. Before this, she had experienced Xiao Yichen's magical telepathy. She realized that between Xiao Yichen and Yu, Xiao Yichen's telepathy was especially sensitive. In the past, even before Xiao Yichen met Yu, he would often dream of Yu. It was as if his soul had floated into Yu's body, and he could clearly sense all of Yu's senses. He had once mentioned something to Yun Shirshir. That was, Yu once had a fever. He was dizzy and lay in bed in a daze. Xiao Yichen said that he had a dream that time. He dreamed that he was lying in bed, and a gentle woman was sitting by the bed, feeding him medicine. That feeling was so real and clear. It was as if he had a fever. When he woke up, he was sweating all over, as if he had just experienced a nightmare. Yu had forgotten about this incident, but Xiao Yichen remembered it clearly. In addition, he often felt angina. After a checkup, all his physical indicators were very healthy, even surpassing the excellent indicators of children his age. His physical fitness was extremely strong. However, it was an undeniable fact that he was suffering from angina. Sometimes, when the pain was too much, he would clutch his chest and freeze on the bed, not daring to move. He was such a painful child, but he broke out in a cold sweat from the torture of angina. Mu Yaja couldn't figure out the reason, but even the most authoritative experts couldn't explain the cause. However, Yu did not sense it so clearly. Compared to little Yichen, he was a little slow in this aspect. However, Xiao Yichen wasn't the only exception among the Geminis. All over the world, many Geminis had a mysterious telepathy with each other. However, Xiao Yichen's was especially strong. Hence, when Xiao Yichen told Yun Shirshir about this dream, she, who was originally depressed, was suddenly filled with hope when she heard this. She also firmly believed that Yu would be fine. Before Yu fell into the sea, news came from the hospital that something had happened to Mu Shi. When Mu Shi found out that Yu was in trouble, she felt guilty and knelt outside the villa for a day and a night, hoping to get Yun Shirshir's forgiveness. However, Yun Shirshir avoided her. She couldn't forgive her. However, she knew Mushi's unspeakable difficulties. Even so, she still couldn't forgive her. Chapter 3382. To be fair, Yun Shirshir treated her assistant well. To her, the latter was not just an ordinary assistant, but a friend. She even invited her to be her bridesmaid at her wedding. This meant that to Yun Shirshir, Mushi was as important as a family member. However, the assistant betrayed her. This was what she could not forgive the most. She trusted her wholeheartedly and did not doubt her words at all. Whatever the assistant said was the truth. She rarely trusted someone so much, and that was because the assistant was Chinjo's subordinate. However, the assistant's betrayal was truly heartbreaking. When Chinjo found out about this, he was furious. He even thought of punishing the assistant harshly. However, he was busy taking care of Yun Shirshir at that time, and could not find the time. The assistant had always wanted to see Yun Shirshir. Whether she forgave her or not, she had to at least apologize to her face to face. She begged the manager, but he replied, "Shirshir trusted you so much, yet you betrayed her. Do you still expect her to forgive you? She doesn't even want to see you. Mushi, I'm utterly disappointed in you. I advise you to disappear from Shirshir's sight. Otherwise, don't force me to take action." The assistant trembled with fear when she heard this. She was not afraid of Chinjo taking action, but she was almost crushed by self-reproach. A month after Yu fell into the sea, she slit her wrists at home to commit suicide. However, she was discovered in time and sent to the hospital. Her original intention was very simple, and that was to pay a life for a life. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. She harmed Shirshir and Yu, so she would use her life to pay for it. Although she understood that her life might not be important to Yun Shirshir, this was the best way she could think of. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only hoped to atone for her sins to the greatest extent. However, her suicide attempt did not succeed. The overflowing water from the bathtub seeped downstairs. The neighbors downstairs called the police and found her committing suicide at home. Hence, she was sent to the hospital in a hurry. After more than 20 hours of emergency treatment, she finally passed the critical stage. When Yun Shirshir found out about this, she felt sorry for her, so she went to the hospital to visit her. Upon seeing her, Mushi's originally disheartened heart was injected with a trace of vitality. She struggled to get off the bed and knelt in front of her with a thud. She cried bitterly, "Shirshir, I'm so sorry. I don't ask for your forgiveness, but other than this, I can't find any other way to apologize. Shirshir, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." She kept kowtowing, and her forehead kept hitting the ground, causing blood to seep out. Yun Shirshir's face was pale. She looked at her, but did not reach out to help her. Her heart had long turned cold, without a trace of warmth. Even though she was crying her heart out, Yun Shirshir still couldn't bring herself to forgive her. "I didn't come to see you to listen to this." Yun Shirshir smiled coldly. "You feel guilty, don't you? Do you really want to beg for my forgiveness?" "That's right. Of course, you do, but don't you think that you're being selfish?" Mushi looked at her blankly. Chapter 3383. After a pause, she curled her lips helplessly. "But that's another matter. I'm very sorry about your parents' deaths. They're innocent, and I implicated them." She clenched her fists and smiled sadly. "What's done can't be undone. Mushi, you're on your own now." With that, she left the hospital. Mushi knelt on the ground in a daze, her whole body cold. A few days later, she pulled out the needle for blood transfusion. In the middle of the night, she left a letter and took the drug. She believed in Buddhism, so she believed that people who committed suicide would go to hell. This was her way of returning home, and it was also the most dignified way for herself. Yun Shirshir was not surprised by Mushi's death. She locked the letter in the cupboard and did not open it to read it again. She believed that the fate of all living things in this world was predetermined. Perhaps this was also fate's fetters. Mushi's parents were implicated because of Yu. She could not deny this. However, Yu was also because of Mushi. There was no news of him until now. It seemed that fate was playing tricks on them. Even so, she still believed that Yu was safe and sound. Every day, she would pray sincerely, hoping that one day, when she returned home, she would see Yu with a table full of dishes and wearing a cute teddy bear apron. He would stand at the entrance and give her a gentle hug. "Mommy, you're back." She looked forward to such a day. Yu helped her tidy up the cloakroom in disdain and complained, "Mommy, you really don't have enough clothes. When will I accompany you to shop for clothes?" She looked forward to him carefully opening her door in the middle of the night, sneaking into her room, and folding the bedding for her. Alas, she did not know when this day would come. Little Yueyao could speak now. From babbling at the beginning, he could call out Daddy and Mommy clearly. However, even if Xiao Yichen didn't specifically mention it, how could she not know that the first word Yueyao learned when she opened her mouth was brother? That day, Xiao Yichen was holding Yueyao in the baby's room. When Yueyao hugged him and kept babbling, she stood with her back to the door and covered her mouth tightly. Tears streamed down her face. She heard it. She heard Yao call out, "Big brother." She suddenly recalled the time when Yu ran up to her with Yueyao in her arms and exclaimed, "Mommy, Yueyao knows how to call me big brother." She still didn't believe it. However, now that he heard it with his own ears, he finally believed it. You must have hugged Yueyao more than once to practice her pronunciation. How great would it be if Yu was here? If he heard it with his own ears, he would definitely be overjoyed, right? Yu, did you hear that? Little sister is calling big brother. Ashland Island. A young man dressed in black stood by the seaside. The waves kept coming in wave after wave, submerging his ankles. The sea breeze blew against his face, bringing with it a slight chill. The young man stood on the spot, allowing the sea breeze to hit him. He was wearing a thin black shirt, which kept fluttering in the sea breeze. He gently closed his eyes and slowly opened them again. The sea breeze blew into his eyes, forcing some tears out. On his cold and beautiful face, his gaze was focused. The black diamond earring on his ear was especially eye-catching. Behind him, Lisa carried a trench coat and walked to his side, gently draping it over him. Chapter 3384. Master, the sea breeze is a little strong. I'm worried that you'll catch a cold. The child was indifferent. After Lisa draped it over him, he raised his hand and tightened his collar slightly. However, he continued to stare at the sea in silence. Some time ago, Gong Xiaoying arranged for him to recuperate on this private island. The seaside was warm all year round and was very conducive to recuperation. On one hand, it was to avoid being noticed. Gong Jia often went in and out of the headquarters. If he was left in the Gong family, it was inevitable that news would leak out. On the other hand, it was mainly to recuperate his body. Alice said that recuperation required a relatively quiet environment. Gong Xiaoying thought of this and arranged for Lisa to stay by his side to protect him 24/7. When Lisa found out that she had a new master and came to his side, she was a little surprised. It was him, although his name had changed, and he was no longer Yu, but Gong Fan. His personality seemed to be very different from before. When he woke up, he liked to stand by the sea and gaze at the sea. No matter what she said, he was never stingy with a word of agreement. When he was still called Yu, although he sometimes showed maturity that did not match his age most of the time, he was still as innocent and naive as a child. However, now that he had become Gong Fan, he had become a person that she could not see through. He did not speak often. At most, he would speak less than 10 sentences a day. He was concise and to the point. However, after spending some time together, they had developed some tacit understanding. Sometimes, she could understand what he meant with just one look. He would only say something once. If she could not hear it clearly, he would not repeat it a second time. When he came to this island, other than cooperating with Alice's treatment, he was very punctual with his 4 meals a day. Every morning at 7 o'clock, he would wake up naturally. When he woke up, he would walk around the beach and then return to the study room to read for the entire morning. After lunch, he would go to the medical center for a checkup. His physical condition was very bad. After a period of recuperation, his various functions had been improved and optimized. Sometimes, when Alice was not on the island, he would enter the laboratory in the afternoon to study quantum transmission. At night, after dinner, he would go to bed early to rest. Lisa knew very well that his silence was not only because he was cold, but also because many of his memories had been sealed away. As a result, his mind sometimes went blank. The only thing that left a deep impression on him was the Heavenly Eye Project. Normally, he would lock himself in the laboratory and constantly check the formulas. Sometimes, she would walk in and accidentally see him leaning over the table, breathing lightly. When she saw this, her heart ached a little, but there was nothing she could do. She knew that it was Gong's Shaoying's order that Alice sealed his memories. He was arranged to stay on this island, and she dutifully protected him. "Master, the wind is getting stronger. Let's go back," she whispered beside him. Gong Fan didn't say anything. His back didn't move at all. His skin was almost numb from the cold sea wind, but even he himself didn't know what he was waiting for by the seaside so stubbornly. The temperature gradually dropped, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. He suddenly turned around expressionlessly and walked towards the villa. Lisa immediately followed behind him. Chapter 3385. Xiao Bao had always been troubled by one thing. That was, his mother didn't seem to be very happy staying in the Gu family. Chuho settled down in the Gu family. In fact, she didn't want to stay here. The huge Gu family was more like a prison to her, completely restricting her freedom. However, she had no choice but to stay here because of Xiao Bao. She couldn't leave him. He was her only support. Therefore, even if it was for Xiao Bao, she had no choice but to stay in the Gu family. Gu Jinglian sent a maid to serve her. In ancient times, this would be considered a personal maid. However, Chuho knew that this maid was staying by her side. On the surface, it looked like she was taking care of her daily life, but in fact, she was monitoring her in disguise. Gu Jinglian seemed to value Xiao Bao very much. This was beyond her expectations. Based on her understanding of Gu Jinglian, this man was a typical man who didn't believe in marriage. He didn't think much of women and children. He didn't seem to care much about descendants. It wasn't as if there weren't women who used all kinds of methods to get pregnant with his child and climb up the social ladder. However, Gu Jinglian was very vigilant about this matter, so no accidents had ever happened. She was probably the only exception. The maid who served her was called Jianjun. She wasn't an ordinary maid. Chu Ho had seen the lines on her arms by chance and knew that she must be a woman who knew martial arts. Therefore, she wasn't close to Jianjun. At first, when she was in the Gu family, she was ordered to leave the house and was grounded. In the Gu family, she did not have anywhere to go. She could only stay in her room, read books, or actively train. Her body gradually recovered, but after a long day, it was dull and boring. Later, Xiao Bao cried badly and pestered Uncle Fu for his mother. Uncle Fu reported it to Gu Jinglian, and Chuho finally had the right to go out. She usually woke up early to send Xiao Bao to kindergarten. In the afternoon, she and Uncle Fu would go to pick up Xiao Bao from school. The task of sending and fetching fell on her. Xiao Bao would pester her every night and sleep with her. The kindergarten gave a lot of homework. Some were homework to read outside the classroom, but most of it was manual work. However, Xiao Bao didn't seem to have any talent in manual work. He could draw half-heartedly, but when it came to cutting paper or other handicrafts, he had to beg the others in the Gu residence. For example, one day, the kindergarten gave homework to the children to make a three-dimensional greeting card. Xiao Bao. Uncle Fu immediately patted his chest and volunteered. Isn't this a simple task? Thus, he prepared a pair of scissors and colorful paper and started to work boldly and decisively. Half an hour later, Uncle Fu presented his work to Xiao Bao as if he was presenting a treasure. Xiao Bao looked at the messy mess and wanted to cry. Uncle Fu gritted his teeth and immediately gathered a group of men in the Gu residence to the study. When Chuho arrived at the study, she was shocked by the array of men in front of her. She saw a group of muscular, tall, and strong fighters of the Gu family hunched over a pile of paper with a frown. They held a pair of scissors and gestured up and down, but didn't know where to start. They were used to holding guns, fighting, being stabbed, and bleeding, but it was really difficult for a group of strong men to cut something so delicate with such a small pair of scissors. Chapter 3386. Half an hour later, a group of men were crying and begging for mercy. Young master, if you want us to start a fight, we can do it. We guarantee that we will climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of fire. But making a greeting card is too difficult. We don't know how. Xiao Bao said, angrily, who wants you to fight and kill? It's just a simple manual task. Can't you do it? We really don't know how to do it. Yeah, this is much harder than beating people up. That's right. When we were young, it was already a luxury to have food to eat and a book to study to. Unlike now, we don't know how to give such difficult homework. Xiao Bao hated them for being so disappointing, so he asked Gu Jinglian for help. Thus, he took the notebook and walked to Gu Jinglian's study. Gu Jinglian was practicing calligraphy when Xiao Bao pushed the door open and walked in. He climbed onto him on all fours, laid out the handmade paper and scissors in front of him, and pressed them on the Xian paper. He demanded righteously, Uncle, make a greeting card for me. Gu Jinglian was speechless. He looked coldly at the ink stain that Xiao Bao had accidentally spilled onto the Xian paper. He held back his anger and asked through gritted teeth, Do you want to die? Uncle, please help me. Xiao Bao tugged at his sleeve pitifully and was about to cry. If you don't help, I won't be able to find anyone to help me. Make it yourself. But I don't know how to do it. Xiao Bao said pitifully, I don't know how to use scissors. It's so hard to learn. He bit his lip and stretched out his hands pitifully. His fingertips were full of scissors. It was obvious that he had been cut by scissors. Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. A hint of nervousness finally appeared in his eyes. What happened? I don't know how to use scissors. That's why I keep cutting my fingers. Gu Jinglian's lips twitched violently. He said impatiently, So troublesome. However, even though he was stubborn, he still picked up the scissors and snorted coldly. What do you want to make? Greeting card. Xiao Bao smirked. The three-dimensional kind. A 3D greeting card. Who would do that? Gu Jinglian's face was gloomy. He folded a piece of handmade paper into two halves and then waved his brush. A minute later, Xiao Bao stared blankly at the greeting card that Gu Jinglian had made. It was a piece of white handmade paper. It was folded in half, and there were two large words written on it with a brush, three-dimensional. Done. Gu Jinglian rested his chin on his hand. A 3D greeting card. Xiao Bao's eyes widened in shock. That's how it works. Didn't you say you want to make a 3D greeting card? Gu Jinglian pointed at the two words on it. Yes, it's very three-dimensional. Xiao Bao. This was truly a painstaking effort. Uncle, you're too perfunctory. Is it so difficult to make a three-dimensional greeting card? Harder than beating you up. Xiao Bao. If he still couldn't understand the threat in his words, then he would really be a silly Xiao Bao. He obediently packed up his belongings and walked to the door with a frown. Gu Jinglian looked at his aggrieved back and frowned. This guy was really useless. Late at night, Chu Ho walked past the study and inadvertently saw that the light was still on through the half-closed door. She opened the door doubtfully and saw Gu Jinglian sitting in front of the desk, yawning lazily. On the desk, there were all kinds of handmade paper in various colors. There were handmade knives, scissors, and other tools. Chapter 3387. He looked a little tired as he lowered his head. The greeting card in his hand was already half done. After Xiao Bao fell asleep, Uncle Fu came to tell him that Xiao Bao was crying because of the greeting card. Gu Jinglian secretly scolded him for being a good-for-nothing for crying over such a small matter. He ordered Uncle Fu to prepare the handmade paper. After studying it for a while, he began to work seriously. Actually, the three-dimensional greeting card was not difficult, but he did not have the patience to do so. However, a certain man had always had a sharp tongue. When Xiao Bao cried, his heart softened. He did not say anything on the surface, but secretly started working at night while the little guy was asleep. The principle of the three-dimensional greeting card was very simple, but it required a lot of patience to work on it. The details were extremely complicated. If he was careless, he would fail at the last step. He followed the tutorial provided by Uncle Fu and finished the back. Then he used a pen to outline the lines on the drawing and used a handmade knife to cut it bit by bit. Chu Ho stood at the door and watched silently. She could not believe that this man had such patience. He had always valued time like gold and had always been stingy with wasting time on meaningless things. She did not expect that he would be so serious about dealing with Xiao Bao's handiwork. He seemed to be so focused that he did not even notice Chu Ho standing at the door. Chu Ho was a little curious about what he was doing, so she slowly walked into the study. The sudden footsteps finally startled him. Gu Jinglian looked up and met her inquisitive gaze. What's wrong? He raised his eyebrows expressionlessly. You're still awake. Aren't you awake too? Chu Ho walked coldly to the desk. Before she could take a closer look, Gu Jinglian casually hid the greeting card and looked at her vigilantly. What are you looking at? I'm looking at what the greeting card you made looks like. I didn't make it. Gu Jinglian said stubbornly, Uncle Fu made it. Oh, then let me see what Uncle Fu's greeting card looks like. Get lost. What? Are you shy? Chu Ho smiled and said, Indeed, with your temperament, I don't think you have the patience to deal with a kindergarten's manual work. I told you to shut up. Didn't you hear me? Chu Ho reached out and pushed his arm away. Gu Jinglian blocked her hand with a backhand. You won't let me see, but I insist on seeing. Chu Ho's other hand also reached for the handmade greeting card that he was blocking. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly, grabbed her wrist, and fiercely swung it away. You dare? Back and forth, the two of them had already exchanged 3 to 4 rounds of blows. Chu Ho was skilled in martial arts, but Gu Jinglian was no pushover either. His skills were definitely above hers, so he was able to block her attack in an instant. My patience is limited, so Gu Jinglian said coldly, Don't test my patience again. Chu Ho snorted disapprovingly. It's probably because it's ugly. Gu Jinglian was speechless. It's fine if you don't want to see it. I'm not interested anyway. After Chuho said that, she left the room without looking back. Gu Jinglian stared at her back view. This woman was getting more and more brazen. The next day, when Xiao Bao woke up, there was a greeting card on the bedside table. He rubbed his eyes and opened it curiously. However, when he opened the card, he saw a three-dimensional cartoon cat coming into his view. Wow. Chapter 3388. Xiao Bao exclaimed in surprise. He was pleasantly surprised. The cat's scissors were lifelike. The corners and the details were exquisite, without a trace of coarseness. The cat's expression was lazy and cute, and its big eyes were lively and charming. Was this a three-dimensional greeting card? However, who was the one who did it, and who secretly put it on his bed? Could it be Uncle Fu? Xiao Bao put on his clothes and took the card to Uncle Fu. He asked excitedly, "Uncle, Uncle, did you make this?" Uncle Fu looked down at the card in his hand and smiled knowingly. He nodded. "Yeah, what do you think? Do you like it?" Xiao Bao nodded excitedly. "Yeah, I like it very much. I didn't expect Uncle Fu to make such a beautiful greeting card. But why was the card you made yesterday so ugly? This is what a greeting card should be." Uncle Fu scratched the back of his head guiltily. He coughed awkwardly and cleared his throat. "No, I was just trying to make you happy." But in reality, this greeting card was not made by him at all. In the morning, a man who had stayed up all night to make the card came to him and asked him to put the card on Xiao Bao's bed. Uncle Fu's eyes almost fell out of their sockets when he saw the greeting card made by Gu Jinglian. "Old master, I didn't know you were so clever with your hands." Gu Jinglian glared at him. "If it weren't for you useless people, I wouldn't have been so clever with my hands." Uncle Fu rubbed his nose awkwardly. "You don't even know how to make a greeting card. Have you really gone senile?" Fu Bo complained aggrievedly. "How could that be? I've never made one before." "Cut the crap," Gu Jinglian said. "If there's a next time, there definitely won't be a next time." Gu Jinglian turned around and was about to go back to his room when he suddenly thought of something. He said to Uncle Fu, "If that guy asks who did it, just say you did it. How would I dare to steal old master's credit? Do as I say." Gu Jinglian said coldly, "Did you hear that?" Uncle Fu looked at him and finally understood. He nodded. "If you dare to leak any information, I won't spare you." "Yes, master." Uncle Fu narrowed his eyes meaningfully and observed Gu Jinglian's uneasy expression. He knew. Master must have felt that staying up all night to make handicrafts for the little guy was a very shameful thing. However, Leoi was used to being stubborn and wanting to save face. Thus, Uncle Fu took the blame. Xiao Bao held the greeting card and found Chu Ho. He said happily, "Mom, look, Uncle Fu made a greeting card for me. Is it nice?" Chu Ho looked at the greeting card in his hand. The surface of the card was simple but exquisite. When he flipped it open, a lifelike kitten could be seen. However, Xiao Bao said that it was Uncle Fu who did it. She didn't think so. Gu Jinglian probably felt that it was too shameful for him to stay up all night to make a greeting card for a child, so he pushed the blame to Uncle Fu. It was hard to imagine that a man like him would make such a cute greeting card. It didn't match at all. Xiao Bao suddenly said regretfully, "If only Uncle made it." Chu Ho heard this but didn't understand. Why? Because Xiao Bao hugged the greeting card and pouted. "I want a greeting card made by Uncle." Why must it be a greeting card made by Uncle? Chu Ho squatted down with interest and saw Xiao Bao looking at her bashfully. He was a little embarrassed to say it out loud. Because he liked Uncle. Chapter 3389. Because he liked his uncle. Therefore, if it was something made by his uncle, he would cherish it even more. However, with his uncle's cold personality, he wouldn't have the patience to make such a childish thing, right? Xiao Bao took the greeting card to school. In class, the teacher asked the children to show off their handiwork. The children ran up the stage, either proud or proud of their handiwork. The children in kindergarten had limited hands-on skills. Therefore, most of them completed their handiwork with the accompaniment of their parents. Most of the children said proudly, "My mom made this greeting card with me." Xiao Bao flipped open the greeting card he made, but he was a little disappointed. This greeting card was made by Uncle Fu, but how he wished that it was made by his uncle. When it was his turn to go on stage, he took his time and walked to the blackboard with the greeting card. The teacher walked to his side and squatted down gently. Seeing his complicated expression, she was a little puzzled. "What's wrong, Xiao Bao? Where's your greeting card?" Xiao Bao passed the greeting card in his hand to her. The teacher opened the greeting card. Before she could show it to the children, she was stunned by the exquisite greeting card. She thought to herself, "This greeting card is so exquisite. It must be the work of an adult. How can a child be so good at hands-on work?" Just by looking at the edges and corners, which were so smooth that there were no flaws, she knew that the parent must have put in a lot of effort to make this. The teacher immediately spread out the greeting card and showed it to the other children. There was an exclamation from below the stage. This made Xiao Bao feel very proud. When the children on stage before him showed their greeting cards, there weren't so many exclamations. This showed that his greeting card was very beautiful. "What a cute kitten. This is the most beautiful greeting card I've ever seen." The teacher was even more suspicious. She even suspected that the greeting card was bought. However, upon closer inspection, she realized that every stroke was hand-pasted. Even the color was painted on with a marker pen. It must have been done by the parent. However, even though she was well aware of it, in order to take care of the child's feelings, she still asked, "Who made this card with you?" Xiao Bao opened his small mouth and was just about to say the words, "Uncle Fu," when he looked at the little guys sitting below the stage. They all stared at him with their eyes wide open and were extremely curious. He suddenly swallowed the words, "Uncle Fu." He hesitated and fiddled with his fingers. He was a little unwilling, and his eyes couldn't help but redden. He was really envious. His friends were all accompanied by their parents, but for him, it was Uncle Fu who made it. It was not that he disliked Uncle Fu, but compared to Uncle Fu, he hoped that this greeting card was made by Gu Jinglian. With that thought in mind, he subconsciously said, "My father made this." "Your father?" Xiao Bao suddenly felt a little guilty, but he still forced himself to nod. In his heart, he hugged Uncle Fu's thigh and cried, "Wah! Uncle Fu, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to betray you." Even the teacher couldn't help but be shocked. Chapter 3390. For example, if a man were to do this kind of manual work, he would not be able to do it so meticulously. This greeting card was too exquisite. It was hard to imagine that there would be such a meticulous man who could do such a boring manual work so meticulously. "My dad is very awesome." Xiao Bao clasped his hands behind his back and said proudly, "My dad is the most handsome man in the world. Not only is he very tall, he's also very good at everything. He's the most handsome man I've ever seen." The teacher looked at him with a smile. Children were innocent and unaffected. In a child's heart, their father had always been an imposing and sacred figure. Below the stage, a chubby boy suddenly stood up and accused, "Nonsense!" Little Treasure looked at him and frowned curiously. "What nonsense are you talking about? Nuhan, what do you mean?" The chubby boy crossed his arms and said disdainfully, "Your dad is definitely not as handsome as my dad. My dad is the most handsome man in the world." Just as he said that, Xiao Bao was not convinced. What right do you have to say that your dad is more handsome than my dad? My dad is the most handsome. Your dad is not. The chubby boy snorted and appeared to be very contemptuous. My dad is famous for being a handsome man. My mom said that when my dad was young, many girls chased after him. Hearing that, the teacher could not help but laugh. In an adult's view of the world, these words were nothing more than the most innocent and pure side of a child. However, Xiao Bao took it seriously. You're so fat. Your dad should be chubby too? When the chubby boy heard that, the baby fat on his face trembled, and his chubby face flushed red. He said angrily, I'm not fat. You're fat. Big fatty, big fatty. The teacher hurriedly scolded, Xiao Bao, don't quarrel. You're wrong to say big fatty Nuhan. Although the chubby boy was so fat, it was because he was spoiled by his family. He did not have any taboos and had a big appetite, so it was inevitable that he would be white and fat. Xiao Bao had just transferred to the school, so he had never seen the chubby boy's father before. However, at the parent-teacher conference, the other children and teachers in the class had all seen his father. He was indeed quite handsome. Therefore, the children below defended the chubby boy and said, Nuhan's father is indeed very handsome. But we've never seen Xiao Bao's father before. That's right, Xiao Bao can't be bragging, right? Nuhan's father is really handsome. I've seen it with my own eyes. I just don't know why Nuhan is so fat. Puchi, the audience whispered to each other. Xiao Bao was indignant and said angrily, Anyway, my dad is the most handsome. I'm not bragging. The fat boy still wanted to say something, but the teacher immediately asked him to sit down. At the same time, Xiao Bao returned to his seat, temporarily calming down the situation. However, Xiao Bao, who had returned to his seat, glared at the chubby boy, neither of them willing to give in to the other. When it was time for the break, the chubby boy moved over and walked to his desk. In the past, he crossed his arms and said arrogantly, Xiao Bao, you brag that your dad is more handsome than my dad. You have to apologize to me. Why should I apologize? My dad is handsome. I'm not lying or bragging. Chapter 33:91. My dad is the most handsome in the world. My dad is the most handsome in the world. My dad is the most handsome in the universe. My dad is more handsome than your dad. A little girl sitting in front of Xiao Bao could not take it anymore. She turned around and said helplessly, It's very simple. Xiao Bao, the parent-teacher conference is in a few days. When the time comes, your parents will definitely come. Is Nuhan's dad more handsome or your dad more handsome? Won't we know once we compete? Parent-teacher conference. Xiao Bao widened his eyes in shock. He remembered this. This was the first parent-teacher conference since he entered school, so he took it very seriously. However, he did not dare to tell Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. He was afraid that they would refuse. If they did not come, he would be very sad. He did not know if his uncle would come or not. What if his mom got angry when his uncle came? The relationship between the two of them did not seem to be very good. If his mom came and his dad did not come, then Nuhan would definitely advocate that his dad is the most handsome again. Xiao Bao felt a little troubled. For the first time in his life, he hoped that his uncle and mom's relationship could be like that of an ordinary family, loving and loving. That way, he could let them attend the parent-teacher conference together. Nuhan saw that Xiao Bao was silent and seemed to be hesitating. He said proudly, What? I think you don't dare to compete, right? I already said that you were bragging. You just had to compete with me. Who said that I don't dare to compete? Xiao Bao imitated his posture and crossed his arms. He said angrily, Let's compete then. Who's afraid of who? When the time comes, I'll let you see my most handsome dad in the world. Humph, Then it's a deal. Newhan said disdainfully. A braggart is a big, stupid pig. I'm not a big, stupid pig. Newhan returned to her seat, and the storm came to a temporary end. The little girl sitting in front of Xiao Bao turned around and looked at the greeting card in his hand. She asked curiously, Xiao Bao, was that greeting card really made by your dad? Yeah. Xiao Bao scratched his head guiltily and nodded vaguely. The little girl showed an expression of admiration for the first time. Your dad is amazing. I thought he bought this greeting card. My dad made this. Your dad is so gentle. He's willing to spend time making greeting cards with you. My dad doesn't have the patience. Baby Chu recalled how Gu Jinglian had looked like he wanted to eat him alive when he begged him to make a greeting card last night. He forced a smile and said, My daddy is the best. After school, he came to pick him up, only to see his gloomy expression. What's wrong? Xiao Bao shook his head, but he obviously had a heavy heart. He hugged him in her arms and asked curiously, What's wrong? What's on Xiao Bao's mind now? Aren't you going to tell me? Mom, the parent-teacher conference is coming soon. Will you come? Chuho was stunned. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course I will. I thought it was something serious. So, it's about this? Don't worry. Mom will definitely attend Xiao Bao's parent-teacher conference. Xiao Bao's eyes lit up. Really? Yeah. Xiao Bao jumped into her arms and said happily, Mom is the best. He looked obedient on the surface, but he was secretly laughing. Sure enough, his mom was the easiest to handle. Chapter 3392. In the study, Gu Jinglian was holding a brush and writing calligraphy. Usually when he was free, he did not have any other hobbies. He was used to writing calligraphy or painting. Just as he was concentrating, the door was suddenly pushed open. A rippling voice drifted in. Uncle, Gu Jinglian's eyebrows twitched. Because he was shocked, the tip of the brush in his hand suddenly deviated, and the stroke went far away. Uncle, are you there? Can I come in? Xiao Bao's voice was flattering and fawning. It was coquettish and had a hint of coquettishness. However, this coquettishness was beyond the limits of what an ordinary person could bear. Gu Jinglian looked up with an ashen face, only to see Xiao Bao leaning against the door. His body was leaning against the side of the door. His fair and tender face was blinking his eyes, as if he was throwing flirtatious glances at him. Was he trying to curry favor with him? But why was he trying to curry favor for no reason? What's the matter? There's something I want to tell you. Gu Jinglian raised his guard and snorted coldly. Come in. He removed the failed brush and ink, laid out a new layer of rice paper, dipped the brush in ink, and picked up the brush again. He had just written a line when he saw from the corner of his eye that Xiao Bao had received approval. Like a shy little girl, he used his sleeves to cover half of his face and moved shyly into the study. The corners of Gu Jinglian's eyes twitched violently. He put down the brush and sized him up calmly. He had a feeling that this guy was a little abnormal today. Xiao Bao ran in front of him with small, quick steps. He curtsied and even imitated a proper greeting. Greetings, uncle. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. You may rise. Xiao Bao stood up. His clear eyes were bright and clear. He blinked lightly and threw a flirtatious glance at Gu Jinglian. Uncle, there's something I don't know if I should discuss with you. Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes. Why did this guy suddenly speak in such a genteel manner? Had he been watching period dramas these days? Speak. This is what happened. Xiao Bao cleared his throat and said, The teacher gave us homework yesterday. With the help of Mom and Dad, we finished a greeting card. Isn't the greeting card completed? Xiao Bao complained bitterly. But that card was made by Uncle Fu, not you. Gu Jinglian's expression turned cold. Xiao Bao continued, feeling wronged. The other kids in the class are all accompanied by their parents. And then Xiao Bao blinked and said cutely, "However, if you feel guilty towards me, it's okay. There's still a chance to make it up to you. Compensation. To hell with it." He had stayed up all night to make a greeting card for him. And now he wanted him to compensate him? Compensate for what? It's like this. Xiao Bao rested his chin on the table, his two little paws holding the corner of the desk, and said with a smile, "Soon, the kindergarten will hold a parent-teacher meeting. About this." Gu Jinglian said lightly, "Let Uncle Fu accompany you." "Why?" Xiao Bao almost exclaimed. No. Why do you want Uncle Fu to accompany me?" Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. "Why? You want me to accompany you?" "Yeah." Xiao Bao nodded vigorously. "Yes,